Chapter 1763. The system looked at Yu-Hai-Hei's strangely tender eyes. It trembled. His expression is very perverted and strange. I don't know how to describe it, but why aren't you coaxing him? Why are you running? Wei Wei Bai said, I've screwed up. Yu-Hai-Hei already knows that I don't love him. If I still pretend to love him, he'll probably hate me even more. Wei Wei Bai had never encountered a screw-up before. She didn't have enough experience in dealing with this kind of thing. However, her ability to guess people's hearts hadn't deteriorated. Yu Ma Qian now had a terrifyingly perverted good impression of her and was watching her so closely. He probably loved her so deeply that he still wanted to love her even if he knew that he was being cheated. However, this kind of mentality was different from a gambler who lied to himself that he would win the next round after losing a bet. Yu Ma Qian really accepted the fact that she didn't love him. Then, he calmly tied the two of them together. From coaxing her to reveal her flaws, to setting up the array, to using the power of the pen to bind her soul, and finally, even when he lost control, he didn't torture her to death. This was terrifying self-control. And a calm way of handling things. This made Wei Wei Bai realize that she couldn't lie to him anymore. He wouldn't believe anything that showed that she loved him. Even if she showed that she loved him, he would only think that she was lying to him and would be more vigilant. Wei Wei Bai calmly thought about how to get away from Yu Ma Qian and said, anyway, it's been a lifetime. If I show that I don't love him now, I'll slowly get along with him in the future. I'll let him think that my feelings were created by him and he'll believe me. So her reaction of getting angry and slamming the door and leaving was correct. The system was gratified to see that the host had become a strategy maniac again. This was all experience gained through torture. Wei Wei Bai dragged her sore body and reached out to open the door. She didn't think that she could open the door. After all, Yu Ma Qian didn't intend to let her go. So she used a lot of strength and opened the door. She didn't manage to retract her strength in time and her entire body fell backwards. She staggered a few steps and sat on the ground. Yu Ma Qian sat on the edge of the bed without moving. His fair and slender fingers were holding a thin silver chain. It was the one on Wei Wei Bai's ankle. It was as if he was going to drag her back at any moment. But even after relaxing a few times, he still didn't move. Yu Ma Qian saw her sitting on the ground awkwardly, and a hint of a smile appeared in his eyes. He felt that he was really crazy. He should hate her, but seeing her like this, he felt that she was especially cute. Even at this stage, in his eyes, she was still cute from her toes to her hair. Wei Wei Bai felt a chill on her back. She struggled to stand up. The system said, you need to take a deep breath when you go out, there are, Wei Wei Bai, ? But she was already one step ahead of him. Outside the door, it was completely dark. In the darkness, a headless woman stood, hugging a head. Her pale face was glaring at her with a pair of bleeding eyes. She said, I will die so miserably, Wei Wei Bai. The system finished its sentence, there's a ghost. Wei Wei Bai said that she saw it. Not only was there a ghost, there were a lot of ghosts. Behind the female ghost, a bloody corpse was slowly wriggling. The bloody corpse had no skin. On its mangled body, the blood vessels and flesh were popping, and blood was splattering everywhere. The bloody corpse's face was contorted as it howled in pain, I'm in pain, it's so painful, someone save me. Save button below to record this reading. Chapter 1764. Wei Wei Bai silently took a few steps back. Then, she realized to her horror that there was no door behind her. There was no Yu Ma Qian either. When she stepped out of the door, she had already stepped into Century Ghost Paradise. A bunch of ghosts with twisted limbs crawled out of the dark night. There's someone here. How long has it been since I last saw a human? I'm so hungry, I want to eat her. It's so painful to be my substitute, I want you to be my substitute. Those ghosts kept gathering. Wei Wei Bai saw ghosts crawling from all directions. She had nowhere to run. And she couldn't run. She felt that her fear of ghosts was getting worse. She was scared out of her wits. Wei Wei Bai squatted down. She felt that she needed to take a deep breath. Where did these ghosts come from? The system said, the male lead caught them. You haven't seen enough, there's still a bunch of ancient ghosts that haven't come out yet. In the place where they were suppressed, those scary ghosts were all caught by Yu Maqian. Yu Maqian's current power was due to the reversal of fate. All the ghosts in the world of the living were slaves in his eyes. He could control them however he wanted. Wei Wei Bai said, there's still a bunch. She thought that Yu Maqian had calmed down after taking revenge on her last night. But the real revenge had just begun. A pale bony finger was about to touch her. Wei Wei Bai's face paled. She immediately sat on the ground and stepped back. But a faceless head suddenly appeared behind her and said eerily, where's my face? Where did my face go? Wei Wei Bai said, how would I know where your face went? I don't even have a face myself. System, this conversation. Host is scared silly. Although Bai Weiwei wasn't scared silly, the past of being locked in a closet as a child, and then constantly being tormented by a rich imagination, was brought out alive. She buried her head in her lap. Her fingers trembled as she hugged her knees tightly. The malicious ghosts around her shrieked. Cold hands that reeked of the stench of corpses pulled at her sheets. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. Yu Maqian, where are you? I'm so scared. She cried like a child. She hugged herself tightly, not daring to raise her head. Her tears stained the sheets. Suddenly, a clean and cold hand lifted her face. His fingers were wet from her tears, and his fingers seemed to tremble. Wei Wei Bai retreated in fear. She closed her eyes, not daring to look. Don't eat me, don't eat me. She wanted to escape, but the blanket was stepped on by someone. One hand passed through her knees, and the other hand touched her back, lifting her up. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and secretly opened one of her eyes. She saw Yu Maqian standing in the middle of a group of evil ghosts with her in his arms. The group of evil ghosts trembled and shrank to the side, not daring to stand together with Yu Maqian. Yu Maqian's eyes were red. They were as thin as the blood moon, and there was a strange color to them. His thin lips curved slightly, and his smile was indescribably evil. Do you still want your freedom? Wei Wei Bai trembled violently. She hugged him tightly and shook her head. I don't want it anymore. Hurry and take me away. Her tears rubbed against his thin clothes. The cold feeling and the fragrance of a young girl permeated his body. Yu Maqian's face was hidden in the shadows. For a moment, there was sadness and gentleness. He said softly, at least it's true that you're afraid of ghosts. Even if she didn't love him. Even if she was angry at what he did to her. She couldn't take it anymore and called out his name. / save button to record this reading. Chapter 1765. She was indeed afraid of the dark and ghosts. Wei Wei Bai curled up in his arms and cried, her voice trembling as she said, let's go, leave this place, I don't want to be here. Towards the end of her words, she sounded like a little girl whining. But Yu Maqian knew that she was not whining. She was afraid that she could not control herself, and as a result, the delicate air of a woman was exposed. Yu Maqian's ears were tickled by her voice, and his body started to heat up. He finally understood why some men liked it when girls cried. She had no one to rely on, and could only hug him and cry. So cute. Yumo-chan revealed a twisted smile. He said, I told you, your body is not good, and your soul is not stable. If you go out without rest, you will meet a lot of ghosts. Wei Wei Bai said to the system while trembling, damn it, he was the one who released the ghosts. The system said, yes, it was the male lead who did it. I think there will be a bunch of ghosts following you wherever you go in the future. It's rare to see you so scared. Although I really want to hit you when you're down, thinking about our relationship, I gave up on that idea. Wei Wei Bai said, I am scared, but if I am scared to the extreme, I will go crazy and attack the ghosts. Do you think I will be scared to the point of crying? When she was scared to the extreme, she would not cry. She would only go crazy. She would even have all kinds of thoughts of perishing together. She was crying so softly like a sweet little girl. She was trying to coax Yumo-chan. He already released a bunch of ghosts to scare her. How could she not cry? If she did not cry, there would be more ghosts. System, it forgot that the host is a werewolf, and can even use its own fear. Yumo-chan hugged her and found that she was shrinking even more. Her fingers were clutching his clothes so tightly that her nails were digging into his skin. She was afraid. She probably hated him. Wei Wei Bai trembled as she said, Yumo-chan, I'm not feeling well. I want to rest. Let's go quickly. Yumo-chan enjoyed her dependent and vulnerable look. He smiled and said, then do you still dare to go on a hunger strike in the future? If you don't eat, your body won't be good. Your body won't be able to leave the house for the rest of your life. This was a blatant threat. He was practically hanging his shamelessness on top of his head and parading it in public. Wei Wei Bai froze for a moment before saying in a muffled voice, I'll eat. I'll listen to you. Yumo-chan's expression was gentle. That's right. Always listen to me. I won't harm you, Wei Wei. This freak was truly a freak. Yumo-chan carried her forward. All the ghosts retreated, opening up a path for Yumo-chan. A door appeared out of nowhere from the darkness. Yumo-chan walked in. It was still the same room as before. He placed Wei Wei Bai on a chair. Steaming hot food had been placed on the table at some point. He fed her some porridge that had been boiled to mush. His movements were neither fast nor slow, and he was very patient. Wei Wei Bai was so frightened by the ghosts that she lost her appetite. However, when she thought about how Yumo-chan was probably holding his breath and wanted to torture her, she silently drank the porridge. After feeding her until she was 80% full, Yumo-chan estimated that it was about time. He took a handkerchief and wiped her mouth. Her lips were a little pink, fragile and delicate. When his fingertips brushed against them, he only felt that the softness was captivating. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. She looked up at him in confusion. Her dark eyes were as clear as a spring. The appearance of a young girl was more youthful than a peach in March. However, she had the pink of peach blossoms and was very tasty. Yumo-chan paused and looked at her in a daze. Wei Wei Bai felt that there was something wrong with his gaze. She frowned and slapped his fingers away. I'm tired, Yumo-chan. She didn't give him any face at all. Yumo-chan casually retracted his hand. Then, he gently put it to his lips and sniffed it. This action was very elegant but also very perverted. A smile appeared in his blood-red eyes. And I'm tired too. Let's rest together. Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale. How could she not understand his blatant hint? Before she could escape, her whole body was already in Yumo-chan's arms. He carried her and walked towards the bed. Wei Wei Bai finally knew how to struggle. Yumo-chan, you're crazy. Aren't you afraid that you'll wither? You were like that last night. Aren't your kidneys weak? Yumo-chan pressed her down onto the blanket, his actions forceful yet firm with tenderness. His fingers caressed her face. Finally, his voice was low and hoarse. Wei Wei, can you give me a child? / comma. Chapter 1766. Wei Wei Bai said that she couldn't give birth, so the system had to give birth. Yumo-chan saw that she was looking at him helplessly. Her white face had a trace of confusion, as if she hadn't thought about this problem before. He was very patient as he clasped her fingers and pressed them down bit by bit. He was incomparably gentle as he lowered his head to kiss her chin. His heavy breathing blew against her neck, causing her already thin skin to blush. She was ticklish and wanted to shrink back, as if she wanted to escape this ambiguous torture. Yumo-chan, I can't conceive. Seeing that his hand was about to tear her clothes, she immediately admitted defeat and told him the truth. Yumo-chan's actions didn't change, as if he didn't believe her. He even used more strength as he held onto her body and lowered his head to kiss her lips. The entanglement between their lips was accompanied by his ruthless strength. He sensed her insignificant resistance and pretended not to know, only holding her body tighter with both hands. It was as if this could make her heart unable to go anywhere. His breathing was broken and heavy as he said with a desperate coldness, It's fine, I'll work harder and you'll have one. Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out to grab his hair and angrily said, How can I like you like this? If you're gentler, I might still like you. Yumo-chan paused and then raised his head. The thin lips that were kissing her were stained with a moist luster, making his youthful appearance seem even more seductive. He slowly revealed a cold smile, I was so gentle before, but I didn't see you like me that much. Did you plan to cheat my feelings from the beginning? What do you like about me? Do you think I'm easy to trick or do you think I can protect you? Liars deceive people with ulterior motives. There were only a few kinds of ulterior motives. She felt that he was powerful and wanted him to protect her. Or she knew that he was rich and wanted to cheat him of his money. He took the bait and protected her, giving her everything she wanted and allowing her to live so happily. And she gave him a gift in return. It was a cold and heartless heart and an emotionless gaze. And on the day of the wedding, she felt that this game wasn't fun anymore, so she directly turned around and left him. This was too cruel. What was even crueler was that she didn't have the slightest bit of regret in her heart. It was as if she was very familiar with this kind of game. She's an old liar. She was a selfish and cold woman who was used to deceiving people's feelings, and then stepped on the victim's body and left triumphantly. How could he feel that her heart was soft and her body was warm? No evil ghost could compare to this pair of calm eyes of hers. How sinister! Yumo-chan really hated himself. Why did he have to see her so clearly? Being deceived by her was actually a blessing. If she didn't want to leave and lie to him for the rest of his life, he would be so happy. She was the one who had forced him into such an unreconciled and painful state. Wei Wei Bai felt that Yumo-chan was too insightful. Once he chose to examine her calmly, it didn't matter how good her acting skills were. This guy had countless pairs of eyes. He could examine her all the time. She was not a god. She could not stay in the same tricking state for 24 hours straight. Wei Wei Bai knew that she had encountered the biggest crisis in a long time. The crisis of being exposed. However, as long as the system was not exposed, then everything was not the worst. Wei Wei Bai stiffly pulled the corner of her mouth and revealed an awkward smile. I didn't lie to you. I liked you from the beginning, bam. He slammed his hand on the bed beside her face. / save button. Chapter 1767. The bed board was smashed into pieces. Yumochian's eyes were cold as he smiled. Continue making things up. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to make things up. She was so scared that tears appeared in her eyes as she looked at him pitifully. I am afraid of ghosts. When I saw how good you were at catching ghosts, I thought that it would be cool to have a boyfriend like you who could catch ghosts. I didn't think that you would like me so much. Her words actually had a tinge of innocence. Her soft and warm body looked at him timidly. She made full use of her girlish demeanor. Yumochian only felt that his heart was bleeding because of her demeanor. He was pained that she was full of lies, but he also felt that she was so cute. He thought that she looked good even when she was lying. He was really crazy. He was really crazy. Yumochian's fingers gently touched the corners of her eyes. When his fingertips brushed past the ends of her eyes, there was a tinge of red. He asked gently, other than me, how many other men have you lied to before? Wei Wei Bai's eyes trembled. No. Yumochian's expression became even gentler. He lowered his head and kissed the corners of her eyes, kissing her tears out. That's good. At least you know that you should lie to me about such things. She was so familiar with making him fall into her trap. Every move was set up to lure him into hell. How could she only lie to him? She didn't know how many people she had lied to be able to trick him into wanting to die together with her so that they couldn't be separated for eternity. But he didn't want to know which unlucky man she had lied to. Because just thinking about it made him so jealous that his heart was pierced and his body burned with poisonous flames. He didn't want to hate her more, and he didn't want her to hate him. If he knew that she had other men, he might start a massacre. Slaughter the innocent. Wei Wei Bai, I'm not lying to you. You have to strangle me. Yumochian firmly but gently held her hand, bringing it to his lips and kissing it gently. I don't want you to hate me. I also want to be gentle to you, but now I feel terrible. I feel terrible whenever I think of you not loving me. He kissed her from the back of her hand, from her elbow to her shoulder, all the way up. Finally, when he reached her lips, his tone was terrifyingly soft. That's why I sometimes think it's good to strangle you to death. With that said, he grabbed Wei Wei Bai's neck. He didn't use much strength, but it was enough to make Wei Wei Bai freeze in place. He pressed her under his body. It was clearly a cruel coercion. His movements were surprisingly gentle and affectionate. It was as if he couldn't bear to let her feel too much pain. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She wanted to struggle, but he didn't dare to let her move. He was afraid that she would resist him. He was trying to make it look like a consensual affair. If she refuses, defy him. He was in too much of a sorry state. He was too pitiful. Yumochian said in a low voice, Wei Wei, don't leave me, okay? He was bound to her soul, but he was still extremely uneasy. Wei Wei Bai wanted to say yes, but when she saw Yumochian's pained expression, she knew that she had to say it. Yumochian was probably going to go crazy. After all, he didn't believe a single word of hers now. Any gesture of goodwill from her would remind this man of how he had been deceived. Wei Wei Bai sighed. She had hit a bottleneck. The strategy was useless, and her deceit had been seen through. Indeed, she couldn't be a salted fish. The promised sweet biscuit was going to choke her to death. Her confused and calm appearance was as delicate as a naked lamb. Her short hair was a little longer and scattered around her face, which made her delicate face look even more small and tender. // save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1768. Yumochian collected all the yellow talismans in the room. On his beautiful jade-like fingers, the golden light dissipated and turned into silk threads, collecting the spirit energy on the yellow talismans. In the end, it turned into a small ball of faint blue light. This was the spirit energy that Wei Wei Bai's soul had drifted out due to her fear and uneasiness during this period of time. He turned around and saw that she was still sleeping, so he put the blue mist into her forehead. Her soul was very unstable. If he didn't want to bind her soul, he would have carefully searched her soul state. He still didn't know that her soul was so unstable. In this kind of soul state, her soul could run away from home at any time. Yu Ma Qian didn't know that Wei Wei Bai really wanted to run away from home at any time. He thought that during this period of time, he had scared her, tortured her, and imprisoned her, causing her to be uneasy day and night. That was why her condition was so bad. Yu Ma Qian tapped her forehead with his finger. When his fingertips touched her warm skin, he couldn't help but gently tuck a few strands of hair behind her ear. Her ears were small and cute, soft and pink. People with a pure young body were born with a warmer blood energy. That was why they blushed easily. It was special when they were excited. He thought of last night. Yu Ma Qian silently suppressed his imagination, not daring to be too presumptuous. Her soul was already so unstable. He shouldn't torment her like this. But could they have a child like this? Yu Ma Qian's hand couldn't help but touch her abdomen. There were no signs of another life. It seemed that they still needed to break in more and practice more before they could have a child. Yu Ma Qian himself was also raw. He was just relying on brute force. Wei Wei Bai didn't cooperate most of the time, making his movements even more rushed and unreliable. If he was too rough, the success rate might not be so high. She also didn't like the child. Her parents gave birth to it when they were unhappy. Yu Ma Qian's mind was full of messy thoughts. When he came back to his senses, he saw Wei Wei Bai staring at him. She shrunk her face into the blanket, revealing a pair of black eyes that were so clear that one could see the bottom of them. She was still a little scared. So she didn't dare to move and let his fingers touch the fine hair on her forehead. It was obviously a very intimate action, but in Wei Wei Bai's eyes, it was like a beast touching her head. Her eyes were full of vigilance. Yu Ma Qian paused for a moment before letting go of her as if nothing had happened. Then he said, "I'll keep the talisman. Now that you're in better condition, you can go out." In fact, he didn't intend to let her out at first. When he was angry, he thought of it. But when he saw her crying so hard that his heart was about to break, he came to his senses. He knew that his crazy actions could not make things better. He couldn't take revenge. He only wanted to like her and love her. So he could only put away those torturous thoughts. He didn't want to see the Wei Wei Bai who cried so miserably last night. He didn't like her crying. Whether it was real or fake, he didn't like it. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to believe his words. She said in a muffled voice, "You're releasing ghosts outside the door." There were so many ghosts. She couldn't open the door at all. Yu Ma Qian saw that although there was a hint of fear in her eyes, behind that fear was a quick-witted craftiness. She was a natural liar. No matter what the situation was, she had to use deception to get what she wanted. Yu Ma Qian reached out and reached down her leg. Wei Wei Bai froze and didn't dare to move. Is at https://www.sashu.com/ Chapter 1769. Yu Ma Qian lowered his head and sighed. "I'll put them away. You can go wherever you want. You're my wife now, and I'm the martial uncle of the Tian Dao sect. All the wealth in the sect is under my control." He immediately realized that she was lying to him. His first reaction wasn't to find her. Instead, he went to fight for the position of martial uncle of the Tian Dao sect. It was all for the enormous wealth of the Tian Dao sect, the terrifying connections, and the power to control others. In this world, ordinary people couldn't escape the imprisonment and control of power. She was a liar, but she was just an ordinary liar. What he had now made it impossible for her to escape from him. Even if he didn't like these things, he felt that it was worth it to build a cage for her. Moreover, he had more money. She could lie to anyone, but she couldn't lie to such an excellent man like him. After she got a taste for him, she wouldn't lie to anyone else. In this day and age, rich men were very popular. Yu thought about the various posts he saw on the internet and felt that he was the best man in the eyes of those people. He immediately felt relieved. Wei Bai couldn't find a better man than him. So he needed to earn more money and have more power to let her know. She could get everything by being by his side. Liars didn't just lie to people like that. If he had it, she definitely wouldn't leave. Wei Bai felt that Yu Maqian's expression was very strange. He looked relieved and angry at the same time. He looked a little schizophrenic. His hand touched her ankle. There was a thin chain there. He pinched it, and the chain broke. Only a small section of the chain on her ankle was left. It had become a decorative anklet, and it looked quite pretty in a simple style. He said, "I won't restrain you. As long as you're happy." Wei Bai was speechless. She said to the system, "Does Yu Maqian have something scary waiting for me?" In just one night, he had turned from a rabid dog to a loyal dog. The system said, "Favorability, 97, soul-bound. Plus, he feels that you won't be able to escape, so it's normal for him to feel safe." It was said that a rabid dog had turned into a loyal dog. It was better to say that Yu Maqian had always been a pitiful little loyal dog. Then, because he felt that he had been abandoned, he went berserk. Wei Bai asked, "Why are his eyes still red?" Yu Maqian's eyes were only black when he was normal. If there was a redness in the middle of the eyes, then it was the condensation of evil thoughts. In other words, the current Yu Maqian was no longer a harmless little sweetie. Instead, it was the poisonous Blackie. The system said, "Can't you let people remember the pain, forget the purity, and turn them into trash after they get hurt?" With Yu Maqian's current condition, it was impossible for his eyes to turn black, and it was unlikely that they would turn black in the future. Whenever he saw Wei Bai, he would worry that his wife would run away. Could he not be bad? Furthermore, he did not even have a fountain pen, so who would absorb Yu Maqian's evil thoughts? It would all depend on Yu Maqian to absorb them himself. He was so gentle and cute in the beginning, but he was still eaten by the fountain pen because of his evil thoughts. Wei Bai thought about the system's words, then looked at Yu Maqian's eyes, and felt that it made sense. Who did not have a time to grow up? Which pervert did not have a pure and innocent past? Yu Maqian saw that her eyes were wide open, staring at him without moving, as if she still did not believe his words. He did not say anything, but only gently stroked her hair, feeling the warmth of her hair on the tip of his fingers. Crossover system, my Adonis, come over here. /crossover system, my Adonis, come over here. / crossover system, my Adonis, come over here. Crossover system, my Adonis, come over here. The save button below to record this reading record. Crossover system, my Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 1770. The atmosphere between the two of them was unexpectedly warm and peaceful. No matter how much he messed around, Wei Bai felt that Yu Maqian was finally not so crazy. Perhaps it was because his kidneys were weak, so he entered the state of a sage and his personality returned to its gentle state. He didn't lock her up or scare her with ghosts. After she rested well, she tried to step out of the house. The outside was frighteningly normal. There was a row of expensive solid wood antique furniture. There was also a pile of decorations that she didn't understand. In any case, there was only one word to describe them: expensive. These mysterious places in the Natural Tao School were similar to those in the Imperial Tao School. They were all antique. To do a good job as a charlatan, this kind of face-saving work still had to be done. Yu Ma Qian was dressed in a grayish-silver tang suit with one hand behind his back. Under his short black hair was a pair of black eyes that were dyed red. He looked deep and mature. He lowered his head and was writing something. After he finished writing, he casually stuck a yellow talisman. The piece of paper that he had written disappeared. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before slowly walking to his side. Yu Ma Qian looked back at her and saw that she immediately looked away. Standing in a place facing the sun, she hadn't seen the sun for many days, causing her to become thinner than before. Because of what had happened in bed, she became even more charming and alluring. Her every move was more seductive than before. Yu Ma Qian's throat tightened. He hurriedly took a deep breath and barely suppressed the greed and malice that surged in him. He knew that she still didn't dare to believe him. She was afraid that he would lock her up again. That was why she, who had always been bold and lively and extroverted, was so careful. Yu Ma Qian's fingers nervously pressed on the table. He suddenly said, "Just now, it was work." Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't say anything. Yu Ma Qian wanted to talk to her. Their current situation was like standing on a barrel of gunpowder. He was afraid that the rare silence between the two of them would disappear. Therefore, he had no choice but to make up some nonsense. A client who was haunted by a ghost spent 10 million to get me to dispel his bad luck. Wei Bai leaned against the antique shelf. She looked at him calmly, as if she was quietly listening to him. Yu Ma Qian seemed to be encouraged. Recently, the natural law school's commissions have tripled. I will try my best to complete all the commissions with my puppets. His voice trembled as he stared at her. His voice became gentler as he said, "I won't leave your side." Wei Bai frowned. She didn't seem to like what he said. This was too domineering. Yu Ma Qian walked up to her and held her face in his hands. He lowered his head and kissed her eyes, cheeks, and lips. This series of gentle kisses was too precious and soft, making it almost impossible for anyone to feel offended. Wei Bai said, "Yu Ma Qian." Yu Ma Qian's nasal voice was a bit heavy. He nodded and said, "I will work hard to support the family in the future. Don't leave." He could lock her up. But he wanted her to stay willingly. In the past, he was never afraid of her leaving. So every time he went out, he was very calm. He was only worried that someone would bully her or hurt her. But now, what he was most afraid of was, as soon as he left, she would disappear. This feeling was really uncomfortable. Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Suddenly, she said softly, "Will you still scare me with ghosts?" She was afraid of ghosts. But it wasn't to the point of breaking down. It was just a childhood shadow that made her feel uncomfortable whenever she saw ghosts. She only cried so miserably because she wanted to soften Yu Ma Qian's heart. Yu Ma Qian thought that this was her weakness. If you like. Chapter 1771. Yu Ma Qian paused and forced a smile. "No, I won't. I won't in the future." Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. At least she didn't torture Yu Ma Qian to the point of no return. If he could make such a promise, at least his life would be much easier in the future. Wei Bai tested him step by step. "I won't have children." Yu Ma Qian was silent for a moment before he forced himself to reply. "Then I won't." Wei Bai, the evil Yu Ma Qian was actually so easy to talk to. A gentle person was also a gentle person when he turned into a lunatic. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's expression soften, she seemed to be less wary of him. Yu Maqian's tense heart finally relaxed a little. He had been thinking about it for a long time. Torturing and locking her up because she made a mistake could indeed satisfy his morbid sense of insecurity. But it wasn't good for the rest of his life. After all, he had to spend a lifetime with her. If she was unhappy for the rest of her life, then he wouldn't be happy either. Yu Maqian thought about it before he gave up his pain, resentment, and unwillingness to be deceived. He tried his best to suppress his evil thoughts. It was just so that their relationship could be gentler. Only with a gentle relationship could she possibly love him. Yu Maqian thought about this plan a few times in his heart, and his expression became gentler. Suddenly, a respectful voice came from outside the door. "Marshal Granduncle, I've brought the person you wanted." Yu Maqian's fingers hooked Wei Wei Bai's hair, and his gentle expression didn't change. He turned around and said to the disciple outside the door, "Bring her in." After he finished speaking, he reached out and carried Wei Wei Bai to the chair he was working on. The yellow rosewood Ming Dynasty chair was cushioned with soft cushions and was very comfortable. Yu Maqian stood beside Wei Wei Bai and casually picked up a document. He said to the person outside the door, "Come in." After the door opened, Bai Bai walked in. He had aged more than 20 years, and his usually pampered temperament was now in a sorry state. The moment he came in, he immediately smiled at Yu Maqian and said, "Marshal Uncle Yu, the Imperial Path sect is willing to submit to the Heavenly Tao sect without any conditions. Please be magnanimous and let us go." Yu Maqian was dead. Yu Maqian was alive. The Heavenly Tao sect was under Yu Maqian's control. In a short period of time, the Heavenly Tao sect's power had expanded even more than before. However, the Imperial Path sect suffered a severe blow. They were suppressed. Bai Bai was death, they were SSS were they already, they were SUs, S, U Bai, S, Us, U. Bai Bai didn't know how much effort he had put in and how many times he had begged before Yu Maqian was finally willing to see him. Yu Maqian was expressionless and his voice was unusually calm. "Come here and sign this document." Yu Maqian threw the document at Bai Bai's feet. Bai Bai immediately picked it up and was stunned when he saw the conditions. He looked up in shock and finally saw Wei Wei Bai, who was sitting behind Yu Maqian. This, let her be the head of the Imperial Path sect. Bai Bai's voice trembled. Although Wei Wei Bai was one of the candidates, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that she wasn't suitable at all. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yu Maqian strangely. She found that his back was tense, but his voice was very calm. "Sign it and get lost." Bai Bai still wanted to say something. Yu Maqian said, "Or you can choose how you want to die." Bai Bai trembled and immediately signed his name awkwardly. He pressed his fingerprint and hurriedly put the document on the table respectfully. Yu Maqian looked at him coldly. Bai Bai was very tactful. He left immediately. Yu Maqian looked at him coldly. He raised his finger and a black shadow followed him. The shadow held a black blade in its hand. None of this was seen by Wei Wei Bai. After finishing all this, Yu Maqian picked up the document and wiped it. Then he handed it to Wei Wei Bai and said, "Sign your name in the blank space on the last page." Wei Wei Bai looked at the document in confusion. The head of the Imperial Tao School. Yu Maqian nodded. "Yes, I am the sect master, and you are also the sect master. This way, we are a match made in heaven. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. /crossover system, Adonis, come here. / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Save button at the bottom to record this reading. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Comma. Chapter 1772. You can search Time Travel System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com on Baidu to find the S. Why did Wei Wei Bai want to know about the Imperial Path sect? Cheating, checking feng shui, catching ghosts, and exorcising evil spirits. Apart from cheating, she was very good at this. She didn't know how to check feng shui. Catching ghosts and exorcising evil spirits, it was good enough as long as she wasn't chased around by ghosts. Wei Wei Bai carefully pushed the document away. You should do it. I don't have the ability to do it. Yu Maqian didn't move the document away. Instead, he firmly maintained the same posture. Good girl, sign it. Wei Wei Bai, why don't you sign it? You can manage the Heavenly Tao sect well, let alone the Imperial Path sect. If Yu Maqian wanted to deal with that bunch of crooked people from the Imperial Tao sect, it would be a piece of cake. Yu Maqian's smile was still gentle, but his tone deepened. Sign it, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai saw that the redness in his eyes was getting stronger. She narrowed her eyes and continued to test his bottom line. What if I don't want to be the sect leader? The gentle smile on Yu Maqian's face slowly disappeared. He suddenly pressed down on her shoulder with one hand, and the strength of his grip made Bai Wei Wei frown. But he didn't seem to feel her discomfort. Instead, he stubbornly repeated in a low voice, sign it. You are one of the successors. Sign this document, and the entire Imperial Path sect will be yours. You should feel happy because this is the best thing you have cheated in your life. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but say, the best thing I have cheated is you. Yu Maqian's redness in his eyes faded, and his expression stiffened for a moment. He relaxed his grip. He seemed a little happy, but also very sad. Wei Wei Bai, his schizophrenic appearance made her a little scared. Yu Maqian, it's enough to get your words. Even if it was a lie, he was still the best person she had cheated. He actually felt that this sentence was very sweet. He swallowed the poisonous sweetness as if it was syrup. Wei Wei Bai had a strange look of bewilderment on her face. Why did she feel that ever since Yu Maqian found out about her scam, his mental state and IQ had become abnormal? After Yu Maqian was satisfied, he was still very persistent. Sign it. It was not a marriage certificate. Why did he insist on her signature? Wei Wei Bai felt that there was a trap. She asked the system, is this file hiding some weird condition that I don't know about? The system took a look and flipped through the information. No, it's normal. Although the Imperial Tao sect has a lot of bad debts, they bought a lot of real estate when they were rich, so they are quite rich. The Imperial Tao sect had many properties, so they were rich. It couldn't compare to the hidden wealth of the natural law school. However, compared to ordinary people, this amount of money was enough to make them rich for 3 generations. Wei Wei Bai, then why does Yu Maqian insist on my autograph? Isn't he afraid that I'll run away with the money? The system said. Maybe it's a dowry. Maybe he wants to marry you, so he prepared a dowry for you first. Wei Wei Bai, that sounds possible. Oh right, how's the seal between my soul and his burning? The system was silent. Wei Wei Bai was silent. After a while of silence, Wei Wei Bai then said, don't tell me that I'll still be unable to leave for eternity. Not being able to leave for eternity was already very frustrating. She wouldn't be able to run away even if she died for eternity. The consequences were worse than taking her life. The system said, I've been working hard for a long time, but I realized that I need a little help to make Yu Maqian's soul unstable. Only then can I really destroy the connection between you two. Transmigration system, my Adonis, come here, /transmigration system, my Adonis, come here. // transmigration system, my Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, my Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, my Adonis, come here. Chapter 1773. Its own strength was enough to erase the mark on the soul. The soul mark would also be burned by it for a lifetime. However, because Yumachian's soul was too stable, it was like a red string. There was no gap for it to go through. What it needed now was for Yumachian's soul to be unstable for a while before it could destroy the chain that bound them together for eternity. Wei Weibai asked, how do I make his soul unstable? The system said, An unstable soul is very difficult for a person like Yumachian. If it wasn't for the fact that he suffered such a huge blow, causing him to want to escape, he wouldn't have made such a low-level mistake. Wei Weibai asked, a huge blow? The system said, actually, it doesn't have to be a huge blow. It can be great joy or great sorrow. It just has to shock his soul to the point that it fluctuates. Wei Weibai was speechless. The system was more useless and unreliable than her. It hadn't used it yet. However, she was used to it. When would the system become so awesome? She might feel that her system had been exposed. Yumachian saw that Wei Weibai was in a daze, as if she didn't want to sign his document. His expression darkened. This was his gift to her. She didn't want to accept it. He had also posted that he wanted to give his girlfriend a gift that he had carefully prepared. Would she accept it happily? The Imperial Gate was a gift that he had spent a lot of effort to prepare. Why didn't she accept it? Right, she didn't like him. So whatever gift he prepared, she didn't like it. The document in Yumachian's hand was almost crushed by him. Malice surged in his chest, and he immediately grabbed her hand and pressed the red ink on it. Then, he forced her to press the blank signature. Wei Weibai was still thinking about what great joy or great sorrow meant. In the end, Yumachian didn't wait for her to react, and she was already forced to accept the Imperial Gate. Yumachian's face was still gloomy when he saw the gift being sent out. From now on, all the wealth of the Imperial Dao sect belongs to you. You have no right to refuse. Whether she was willing or not was none of his business. Since he gave it to her, she had to accept it. Yumachian knew that he had become much more overbearing and unreasonable under the influence of evil intentions. But he did not want to control this malice at all. When he was gentle, she treated him like a fool and lied to him. Therefore, gentleness was of no use to her. Only by being strong could he control this little liar. Wei Weibai raised her eyes to look at him. Her fair and tender face was a little red. Her eyes were indescribably soft, but there was no unhappiness. She seemed to be distracted, but she didn't seem to be uncomfortable with his domineering actions. She looked at the red ink paste on her finger and seemed to be troubled. Yumachian stared at her silently for a while. Suddenly, he lowered his head and licked her finger. The red mark stained his lips. The young man's eyes were filled with an enchanting mist. His thin lips were stained with a trace of red, making him look exquisite and beautiful. He was like a demon that could steal people's souls. When he lowered his eyes, his eyelashes were too thick, casting a dark shadow under his eyes. When this man was seducing people, he was simply a natural at everything. Her fingertips trembled slightly, but there was nowhere for her to hide. Yumachian's kiss was too lingering and too greedy. It felt a little more lustful. Wei Weibai finally couldn't take it anymore. She wanted to withdraw her hand, but she found that his grip on her finger was too strong. She couldn't resist at all. Chapter 1774. She didn't know how much time had passed, but he finally looked up and nonchalantly pulled out a tissue to wipe her hands. Her fingertips became pink and clean. The red mud marks were on his lips. She didn't know what it was made of and whether it would poison him to death if he ate it. Wei Wei Bai thought uncertainly, but she couldn't think of a way to shake Yu Ma Qian's soul. After all, the best time had passed. He already knew that she was lying to him. So it would be very difficult to find anything that could make him feel great joy or sorrow. Wei Wei Bai sighed. She finally thought that she had come to a sweet world. In the end, it was the most difficult world to deal with. As expected, the main system had no asterisk and no hooks. What was done was called human. After Yu Ma Qian wiped her hands, he also wiped his mouth. Those traces of ambiguity were all gone, but the faintly discernible atmosphere was still there. Yu Ma Qian stood and continued to look at the commission. Wei Wei Bai was bored sitting, so she tried to get up and then turned to walk out. Yu Ma Qian looked up and said coldly, "Where are you going?" Wei Wei Bai turned around and smiled at him as if nothing had happened. "I'm going out for a walk." "You said I could go out." Yu Ma Qian looked at her with a deep gaze. Then he finally softened his voice. "Come back early." Wei Wei Bai casually agreed. "Got it, naggy old man." After saying that, she walked out very calmly. Yu Ma Qian watched her leave and froze on the spot for a long time before he ruthlessly crushed a handful of yellow talismans. He wanted to follow her, but he remembered that he had promised to give her freedom. He couldn't break his promise. Yu Ma Qian opened his hand, and a thin chain appeared in his hand. It was the chain that Wei Wei Bai was tied to. Although the chain was broken. But as long as the chain on Wei Wei Bai's ankle was still there, then he would know where she was with just a thought. If she went further away, he would know where to find her. The chain had always been with her. Yu Ma Qian sat on the chair and suddenly didn't have the mood to work. He just stared at the door, as if waiting for her to come back. After Wei Wei Bai went out, she saw that Yu Ma Qian didn't follow her. She chatted with the system. "Yu Ma Qian is not clingy, I'm not used to it." The system said, "The chain on your leg is in his hand, so he knows where you go." If there was something wrong with Bai Wei Wei, it wouldn't be difficult for Yu Ma Qian to open a ghost gate and rush over in an instant. "Bai Wei Wei, I'm relieved." This way, if they encountered any female ghosts in white or red, they could leave them to Yu Ma Qian. When Bai Wei Wei went out, it was a whole day. At night, she finally went home. After all, in a world with ghosts, wandering around in the middle of the night was the treatment of the main character in a horror movie. Wei Wei Bai said that she wouldn't accompany him. When she got home, she found that the lights were on everywhere. It happened to be dinner time. When she entered the house with her bags, she saw Yu Ma Qian sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at her. He looked at the food sadly as if the stewed chicken was his relative. Hearing the sound, Yu Ma Qian turned to look at her. His eyes lit up. But he immediately hid his joy and said calmly, "You're back. Let's eat." Wei Wei Bai put the things on the chair and said to him, "Stand up." Yu Ma Qian wanted to refuse. She went out to play the whole day and didn't even call him. She left just like that. It reminded him of the heartless figure in the mirror. // save. Chapter 1775. His eyes reddened even more. Wei Wei Bai reached into the bag to search for something and said to him, "Brother Yu." Yu Ma Qian immediately got up and stood in front of her obediently. He said coldly, "What's wrong? Are you still going to eat?" "The food will be cold when you come back," Wei Wei Bai said calmly. "It's okay. You eat first. I'll come back after I finish eating." Yu Ma Qian felt like his heart had been hit by a javelin and pierced through. His lips trembled and he couldn't say a word. He couldn't maintain his cold, domineering, and scumbag image. He thought that if he let her go out to play, she would occasionally think of him. In the end, she was happy. Yu Ma-chin clenched his fists tightly. The malicious unwillingness in his heart surged up again. Why let her go out? It would be difficult to take her back once she was ambitious. Raise your hand. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said. Yu Ma-chin raised his hand almost reflexively. The sleeves of a casual jacket covered his arm. Yu Ma-chin froze. He didn't know what she was doing. Wei Wei Bai put on the jacket for him and then looked at him from head to toe. Not bad. This color suits you. Your skin looks good. You won't feel weird wearing anything. Wei Wei Bai then took out a few ties from the bag. Lower your head. Yu Ma-chin immediately lowered his head. Wei Wei Bai reached out and pressed a tie to his neck. Then she tried a few more. She looked at them seriously. This green one is a little too bright. This dark red one is better. Wei Wei Bai said as she took the green tie away. Yu Ma-chin was quick and immediately grabbed the green tie. This one looks good. Wei Wei Bai looked at the back of his hand that was grabbing the tie. The veins were popping out. He liked green ties so much. Wei Wei Bai, then this red one, Yu Ma-chin immediately said, not bad. His eyes were dark and his lips were pursed. He seemed to be a little nervous. Bai Wei Wei picked up another shirt. I see that you're always wearing tang robes. It's obvious that a strong young man wearing them looks old, so when I was shopping, I bought you some clothes. You don't mind, right? Yu Ma-chin looked at her and his expression slowly softened. I don't mind. I like it very much. It was true. He really liked it. She was still willing to treat him well. Even if there were no feelings, he felt that everything he had done was worth it. Wei Wei Bai put away the clothes and said, then let's eat first. Wash the clothes and wear them later. Before she could finish her sentence, Yu Ma-chin's hand was already on her shoulder. He slowly lowered his head and kissed her hair. He was indescribably careful. But there was a deep sense of longing. This action lasted for a while before Yu Ma-chin let go of her and said casually, you eat some too. I made some chicken soup for you. She was just trying to be nice. He had no choice but to admit defeat. Wei Wei Bai put down the bag and nodded. Okay. Everything seemed to be going in a good direction. Yu Ma-chin saw that her face was calm and without any resentment. It seemed that she was willing to be with him for the rest of her life. Yu Ma-chin's heart gradually calmed down. This was good. He couldn't help but smile. Wei Wei Bai drank the soup and couldn't help but smile at him too. The atmosphere between the two of them was very peaceful. It was as if the broken beauty from before had returned. The system saw the two of them smiling and felt that the atmosphere was chilly. It was scared of being abused by the host. It felt that this warm scene was poisonous. It hurriedly ate a few more spicy chicken feet to warm up. Chapter 1776. The days passed by unhurriedly. Wei Wei Bai was very calm, and Yu Ma-chin seemed to have returned to his gentle self. Although Yu Ma-chin was still very domineering at times. Wei Wei Bai did not throw a tantrum, and the two of them enjoyed their warm days together. The system thought that Wei Wei Bai was holding back a big move. After all, it still needed to shake Yu Ma-chin's soul and break the binding of their souls. In the end, it could not help but ask the host, do you have some big plan? Do I need to cooperate? Wei Wei Bai was playing games, and Yu Ma-chin was sitting beside her, helping her play games. That's right. Over the past few days, Yu Ma-chin had been led astray by Wei Wei Bai. Reading novels, playing games, and watching ghost clips. A conservative old man for 100 years. He had been led by Wei Wei Bai to become an internet youngster, and all he did was play with the keyboard. He picked up a game and played it. What kind of game was this? Spending money to buy skins for his wife. If he was a man, he would spend money until his wife was happy. Wei Wei Bai liked ghost clips, and Yu Ma Qin learned to edit them himself. He would edit whatever she liked. The system felt that Yu Ma Qin had fallen. This was simply contaminated by Bai Weiwei to such an extent. A leader of the Natural Tao sect, a master at catching ghosts, and a gentle old man for 100 years. How did he end up like this? Wei Wei Bai was playing games while trying to distract herself. What plan? The system, it's the plan to torture Yu Ma Qin. Wei Wei Bai, what? I haven't thought about it yet, I'll take it slow. The system, Wei Wei Bai, life is pretty good now, I'll just idle around for a while. After all, I have to live in this world for a lifetime, and I'll be bored to death if I don't find something fun to do. It would take a lifetime to experience a few planes. Wei Wei Bai finally had some experience with a lifetime of interaction. Experience was, as long as one lived in a plane for a lifetime. In that case, don't even think about getting rid of this damn target for the rest of your life. This was the experience of blood tears. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai had already calmed down, as long as they did not cross paths forever. She was so casual about it. As for causing Yu Ma Qian's soul to become unstable, this required luck. Even if she wanted to torture Yu Ma Qin now, she wouldn't be able to. Even though Yu Ma Qin had returned to his former appearance as a loyal little dog, he was still very much alive. He was very scheming. Not to mention that the chains on her ankles had not been untied yet. After breaking them, there was no way to remove them. They looked like anklets. It was simply a tool for imprisonment. And her shadow. If it wasn't for the system's reminder, she wouldn't have realized that there was a monitoring puppet made by Yu Ma Qin hidden in her shadow. She was simply being monitored 24 hours a day. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai was now relaxed. She didn't pretend to love Yu Ma Qin anymore. Yu Ma Qin wouldn't believe her even if she pretended. She would treat Yu Ma Qin as a friend. In this state, if Yu Ma Qin didn't protest, she would also feel relaxed. Therefore, she would dawdle for a while before thinking about the soul. As time passed, she was indeed lazy. From the first plane until now. She was too tired from running. It didn't matter if she could occasionally rest in the plane. The system looked at Bai salted fish with a calm expression. It sighed and didn't say anything. It continued to silently guard her. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, Yu Ma Qin, I'm about to be hacked to death. Come and save me. Yu Ma Qin immediately rushed over to save her. Bai Weiwei's game was neither up nor down. Yu Ma Qin had only played for a few days. After learning all kinds of skills, he could lead Wei Wei Bai to kill everywhere. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 1777. After all, he had a lot of money. And in the game, the rich were all bosses. In addition, Yu Ma Qin was quite eager to learn, so he understood most of the rules of the game. It was easy to bring along Wei Wei Bai. After the game, Wei Wei Bai hugged Yu Ma Qin and kissed him deeply. When she was playing the game, Yu Ma Qin followed behind her. It was so smooth that it was like strolling in the back garden. Yu Ma Qin was kissed until his face turned red. He pursed his lips and his breathing deepened. After Wei Wei Bai kissed him, she stretched lazily like a cat, lazy and cute. Then, she didn't even look at him and went to take a shower and get ready for bed. Yu Ma Qin reached out and touched his face. There was still the fragrance of her kiss on it. The redness in his eyes was very strong. Yu Maqian turned around and looked at the bathroom door. The sound of water could be heard faintly from inside. There was an evil fire burning in his heart, making him restless. This period of time was very beautiful. She also stayed by his side. He was still her gentle big brother. Whatever she wanted, he worked hard to learn and give it to her. He could tell that Wei Wei Bai was happy too. During the days of imprisonment, her pale and haggard appearance still made him feel a lingering fear. The Wei Wei Bai now at least smiled at him, hugged him, bought things for him, and cared about him. She just didn't love him. Yu Maqian touched his face and thought silently. She didn't love him. She didn't love anyone. Maybe she was still young and didn't understand love. So it was understandable that she didn't love him. Yu Maqian suddenly heard a cracking sound. He looked down and saw that he had broken the keyboard. Yu Maqian slowly exhaled. He knew that the evil in his heart didn't reduce. His feelings for her didn't disappear either. Therefore, he was still unwilling to give up. Sometimes, he even maliciously thought that if only she ran away, he could break her legs so that she would never have a way out. Yu Maqian quickly reached out and bit his finger. He drew a yellow talisman with his blood and stuck it on his forehead. The yellow talisman combusted without any fire. When the yellow talisman was completely burned, his mind became clearer. The evil thoughts that had locked up Wei Wei Bai and broken her legs finally disappeared a little. Yu Maqian heaved a sigh of relief. He was in a terrible state. His possessiveness towards Wei Wei Bai was too strong. It was easy to be lured and manipulated. The bathroom door opened and Wei Wei Bai walked out in her conservative pajamas while drying her hair. Her skin was as white as snow, and under the dense steam, it looked even more tender and delicious. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the carpet barefooted and lightly ran to the bedside. She took the hairdryer and began to blow-dry her hair. "Big brother you should go take a bath too." Those who didn't know would think that she was hinting at something. However, only Yu Maqian knew that she didn't mean anything. She just wanted him to take a bath. He didn't dare to turn around and look at her. He just faintly acknowledged. Then, he went to take a bath. After he came out of the bath, he casually put on a black silk robe. His black hair was dripping with water, and his dark red eyes were filled with dark desire. It made him look a little dangerous. Wei Wei Bai was already on the bed, lying on the blanket and reading a book. She was in the story of the overbearing CEO falling in love with the little wife, and saw the little wife being locked up by the overbearing CEO breaking her legs. Every time she saw this scene, Wei Wei Bai would quickly flip through the pages. After all, she had the experience of being locked up. Seeing this scene made her feel like she was locked up. It wasn't good to be too experienced. She couldn't feel immersed in reading a novel. Chapter 1778. For a moment, Yu Maqian's mind went blank. Then, he raised his hand almost instinctively, and a yellow talisman appeared. He hid the puppet talisman in the shadow behind Wei Wei Bai. Even if she knew that the chain could find her and knew how to escape, she didn't necessarily know that her shadow was hiding something. When Yu Maqian hid these things, he didn't want to use them. Because once they were used, it meant that she had escaped. The yellow talisman in his hand didn't fly out as expected. Instead, it spontaneously combusted. Spontaneously combusting meant that Wei Wei Bai's puppet talisman was also undone. Yu Maqian looked at the burnt talisman expressionlessly for a while, then suddenly curved his lips into a smile. This smile was even a little crazy. To escape, she had really used all kinds of methods. He could see that these undoing methods were all his methods. Every Daoist had a lineage of skills. He had a fixed time every day to teach her some knowledge of the Tian Dao sect. He wanted to stuff many of his personal experiences and little tricks into her brain. She had no interest in these. So even if she was talented, there were never many decent skills of the Tian Dao sect that she could use well. But he didn't expect that she had hidden selfish motives. In a situation where he thought that she couldn't learn anything, she actually figured out most of the restraints he put on her and then undid them herself. And the methods she used were actually the ones he usually taught her. He thought that she hadn't learned it. But she was waiting for him here. After Yumachin finished laughing, he reached out and grabbed the broken chain. The chain became a complete chain again. He put it away, then got up and walked out. Where could she escape to? Their soul imprints were connected. No matter how she hid, she couldn't escape. Just as Yumachin was looking for someone with the chain, Wei Wei Bai was still studying the yellow talisman. She said, "The life of a top student doesn't need to be explained. A top student has to look like I can't learn, I don't want to learn. In fact, my brain has already learned and is waiting to amaze the world." Wei Wei Bai, geniuses are really lonely. Wei Wei Bai, look at how I unlocked the chains so casually, and how I wiped away Yumachin's puppet spell. Not only am I beautiful, I'm also, the system said, and you're shameless. Bai Weiwei's self-praise almost choked her to death. The system was as calm as the wind. Are you done acting cool? Even a pig can solve it. Why did you learn it? I learned it from you. Furthermore, I taught you how to undo the chains step by step. Even a dolphin would be able to undo them faster than you. You even failed 3 times. You almost failed to undo the puppet spell. If I hadn't stopped you, you would have been hung up and beaten by the Yumachin. Yumachin was always thinking about Wei Wei Bai's bad grades. It wanted to break a particularly easy Heavenly Dao sect technique and feed it to Wei Wei Bai like it was feeding a baby. In the end, this bad student only thought about playing games and being a salted fish. She couldn't learn anything at all. It was all learned by the system. The system didn't learn it on purpose. It was forced. It listened to it every day and watched it every day. How could it not learn? No, that was the host. It was such a smart system, there was nothing it couldn't learn. Wei Wei Bai's bad grades were exposed. She flew into a rage out of humiliation. If it weren't for your information, would I have ended up like this? Hiding in a coffin to hide from people? The system admitted that Yu Tian was Yu Haihei. It was just that it didn't dare to say anything about that night. /crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1779. That was why her great situation was ruined. System, if it wasn't for the red line that was incompatible with the system, how could its data be blocked? Do you know how much space the red line takes? The system didn't dare to say, it could only say bitterly, the male lead's ability is still very reliable, you can't hide for more than a few days. Wei Wei Bai said, nonsense, do you think I can hide for a lifetime? She took the yellow talisman and stuck it on the coffin. I'll let Yu Tian be happy for a night, then turn around and give him a big blow. His soul must be unstable after experiencing great joy and great sorrow, you should quickly cut off the connection between our souls. She risked her life to do so many things. Did the system think she was here to play? The system said, his soul is very strong, even so, his soul doesn't show any signs of instability. Wei Wei Bai stuck the talisman on the coffin and said, I'll hide for half a month, then his soul will be unstable. It was stable now because Yu Tian thought he could still find her. To hide from Yu Tian, she let the system search for information on the Heavenly Dao sect and the Imperial Dao sect. She found a way to hide in coffins. If she didn't go out with this method of hiding, no one would be able to find her. Because coffins separated yin and yang. It could completely hide the soul's breath. In addition to some talismans, it ensured that her soul wouldn't leak out. To buy all these talismans, she even maxed out Yumachian's card. He thought she was shopping, so he was very happy. Because she bought a lot of clothes for him. Yu Tian was very straightforward. He didn't know that although the clothes were expensive, they couldn't be maxed out. The system suddenly asked, "Wait, you don't plan to go out?" Wei Wei Bai stuck the talisman and said, "Why would I go out? Once I go out, Yu Tian will definitely find me." The system said, "You don't want to eat or drink?" Wei Wei Bai sneered. How could the system look down on her? She immediately pulled open the board under her. It was full of canned food, bottled water, and long-lasting biscuits. There were also all kinds of cured meat, chicken, duck, goose feet, dried melon seeds. When he had nothing to do, he would let the system play cartoons or read novels to eat. She thinks it's a vacation. The system was silent for a moment. Are you not going to poop after eating? Wei Wei Bai, the system said, why don't we go out and buy a chamber pot before the male lead finds us? Wei Wei Bai, aw, damn, she had prepared everything. But I forgot the toilet. Wei Wei Bai silently turned around and continued to stick the talisman, not speaking to the system. He thought that everyone had been through a lot in the last few planes and had a deep relationship. The system also became gentler. In the end, he was still the same, poking at her sore spot as soon as he spoke. If she really went to buy a chamber pot, she would crawl out of her coffin before Yumachian found her. He was hung up and beaten by Yu Tian. It was better than living like a chamber pot. Seeing that she had become haggard, the system comforted her kindly. All right, I know that little fairies don't go to the toilet, don't use a chamber pot, and don't poop after eating, so cheer up. Wei Wei Bai, she felt even more haggard. Your whole family is little fairies. She would never be able to call them little fairies again. Wei Wei Bai endured a day, but she still resigned to her fate and crawled out of the coffin. It was okay to not eat or drink, but a life without a toilet was unbearable. She said as she crawled out, you must pay attention to Yu Haihei's situation, you must inform me before he finds me. Chapter 1780. The system opened its heavenly eye. Okay, go to the toilet in peace, little fairy. Wei Wei Bai, she really wanted to beat the system to death. The coffin was placed in a civilian-rented house. This house was very remote, and the owner lived in another city. There was not much use in this house, so it was rented to Wei Wei Bai. No one would find out what Wei Wei Bai wanted to do. So Wei Wei Bai climbed out of the coffin and saw the living room of the house. She put the coffin in the living room. Anyway, as long as Yumachian did not find out about it. Who would have thought that there was a coffin here? So after Wei Wei Bai rushed to the toilet to finish the job quickly, she still had time to wash up. She took a battle shower, brushed her teeth, washed her hair, and applied facial cream on her face without wasting any time. The system, forgot to mention. The system was blocked. Yes, because Wei Wei Bai was actually taking a shower. And the blocking rules were so crazy that as long as the host was scanned and wanted to take off her clothes, it was blocked. It did not care if the host was not looking at the host with its eyes closed. Wei Wei Bai put on her clothes. Her hair was still dripping with water. She rushed into the coffin and closed the lid. The system was just released. When it came out, it was so scared that it almost vomited. Yumachian was already standing outside the house. He was wearing a white shirt and black pants, dressed like a modern elite. Wei Wei Bai bought the clothes for him. He liked old-fashioned clothes and was not used to modern clothes, so he was a little uncomfortable wearing them. But because Wei Wei Bai bought them, he tried to wear them. Yumachian's body was tall, and his youthful aura made him look less solemn when he wore these clothes. But there was a fresh and beautiful feeling. Of course, if it were not for the few ferocious little ghosts at his feet, he would be even more handsome. As soon as he sensed Wei Wei Bai's aura, he forcefully opened the gate of ghosts and urged the little ghosts to drive over. But the aura had disappeared. Yumachian looked at this remote old district. His eyes had completely turned blood red, without a trace of darkness. It was the color of pure blood. Where is she? Yumachian's pale face was expressionless. He stretched out his hand, and all the ghosts in the area appeared. The ghosts howled, but they had no choice but to submit to Yumachian's orders. This man's power made all the ghosts feel uneasy and fearful, not daring to disobey. In the darkness, Yumachian's blood-red eyes had a sickly beauty that made one's heart tremble. He said coldly, "To find my wife." 100 ghosts immediately responded. Yumachian's voice softened. "Don't hurt her. Don't scare her even if she sees me. Just report my whereabouts immediately." The ghosts accepted the order and scattered. Yumachian stood in place. His expression was as cold as ice, and the benevolent gentleness in his eyes had completely disappeared. Traces of ruthless evil appeared on his face. The evil in his heart devoured him, causing him to sink into a frenzied and crazy coldness. He stretched out his hand, and the complete chain appeared in his palm. He looked at it expressionlessly, and then suddenly crushed the chain and threw the broken pieces to the ground. He stepped on the chain and walked over. Sure enough, there weren't enough chains. He'd better get a cage and lock her up. Yumachian looked up and saw the house that Wei Wei Bai had rented. He didn't sense Wei Wei Bai's aura at all, so he just looked at it silently and continued to walk forward. Why did she have to escape? https://www.sashu.com/transmigration system, Adonis, come here, https://www.sashu.com download the full text. https://www.sashu.com transmigration system, Adonis, come here, https://sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 1781. Yumachian's heart was filled with malice, but this doubt almost crushed him. Was he not good enough to her? He tried his best to suppress his possessiveness, the unwillingness and pain of being lied to. He carefully gave her the best of himself. He thought she was really going to like him. In the end, she was better than him. She was a real liar. She pretended to be gentle unlike someone. She was much better than him. Yumachian should not have believed her. Yumachian jumped on a high wall expressionlessly and looked down at all the houses below. The malicious spirits struggled and screamed under his feet. He listened indifferently and forcefully controlled the malicious spirits, causing them to fall into a state of unbearable pain. Pity, when she ran away. She disappeared completely. The malice in Yumachian's heart completely crushed all the gentle kindness. Wei Wei Bai was lying in the enlarged coffin, looking for snacks under the wooden planks. Which is better, the biscuits or the spicy chicken feet? Wei Wei Bai finally decided to eat both. The system looked at her, speechless. Then it reminded her, Wei Wei Bai was throwing the biscuits into her mouth. The system said, I think, Wei Wei Bai said, you're stuttering too. Just say it. The system said, you should finish eating first. It was time for the last meal, so eat more. Wei Wei Bai. She quickly ate more before saying, what's wrong? It can't be that Yumachian is here. It couldn't be so fast. She couldn't hide for more than 2 days. The coffin holder's method of hiding people should be able to conceal her aura. It was impossible that Yumotian could find her in 2 or 3 days. It was not like he was cheating. The system watched as the malicious spirit squeezed out from the gap in the door, its eyeballs almost popping out. The malicious spirit was looking for the eyeballs. If he found the eyeball, he would definitely be able to find the coffin. There was a coffin in the house. Yumotian was not a fool. He would know where Wei Bai was as soon as he heard the feedback. The method of hiding a person in a coffin was too niche. But Yumotian definitely knew what it was for. The system said, "Eat more, then we'll run." Right now, the entire city was filled with ghosts. To find Wei Bai, Yumotian used his power to the extreme. All the vengeful ghosts were manipulated and used by him in a cruel way. The ghosts outside were all Yumotian's servants. It was no wonder that Yumotian's soul was so stable. Under this kind of power, not to mention humans, even Wei Bai would be dead. Not even a soul could escape such a thorough search. When Wei Bai heard this, she paused in the middle of munching on her snacks. Then, she silently took out the most expensive chocolate and stuffed it into her pocket. "How much time do I have?" The system said, "Very soon, 1 minute." No matter how stupid that vengeful ghost was, it was impossible that it could not find its eyeball in 1 minute. Wei Bai immediately cursed under her breath. Then, without hesitation, she opened the coffin lid and climbed out. As soon as she got out, she saw a vengeful ghost lying on the ground, fumbling around with its butt sticking out. "Where are my eyes? Where are my eyes?" This scene was truly frightening. But it was too embarrassing. Wei Bai held back her disgust and stepped on one of the eyeballs, crushing it. System, the host is a werewolf. After Wei Bai stepped on the eyeball, she immediately turned around and ran towards the door. Yumotian, who was standing on the wall, suddenly turned around. He raised his hand and saw a talisman burning on his palm. Her aura. It appeared. Yumotian jumped off the wall and immediately rushed towards where Wei Bai appeared. Now that he had caught her, he would not give her any chance to escape. He could not bear to live without her anymore. He would rather be hated by her than lose her aura. Wei Bai ran towards the roof. There were no stairs on the top floor of the old-fashioned building. It was a vertical iron ladder, and she had a hard time climbing it. The system said, "Why are you going upstairs?" Wei Bai said, "It's too late to run now, so I can only cry, make a fuss, and hang myself." There was no time to hang herself, so jumping off the building was the easiest. She did not believe that Yumotian's soul could still be so stable after she made such a big fuss. She pulled herself together, and even she was scared. The system said, "Wait, Yumotian is up there." Wei Bai was in a hurry to climb, and her feet had already stepped on the roof. "He's up there. How is that possible? Can he fly?" Before she finished, she looked up and saw Yumotian standing in front of her. His feet were on the spot where she was about to jump. At the edge of the roof, a cold wind blew past, and his red eyes under his black hair were cold and evil. "Wei, it's time to go home." He revealed a gentle smile, and slowly reached out his hand. Wei Bai, Yumotian was standing on the spot where she was about to jump off the building, so, where should she stand? The https://www.sashu.com/ the full text at https://www.sashu.com/ download text at https://www.sashu.com they at https://sashu.com Chapter 1782. Wei Wei Bai had encountered an unimaginably difficult mode in this plane. She would probably be traumatized if she came to the Sweet Biscuit plane in the future. She slowly took a few steps back. Behind her was the iron ladder that she had just come up from, and the bottom of the iron ladder was also some distance away from the roof. If she fell down directly like this and fell to the next floor, she might not die. But it was very likely that she would be crippled. Her breathing gradually stabilized, and she looked at Yu Maqin expressionlessly. The system said, "The stability of the soul is still not enough to shake the soul bond between the two of you." The system was also worried sick. If they really let Wei Wei Bai stay in this plane forever, everything they had done before would be in vain. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's reminder, and a bunch of methods turned in her mind. She had a lot of ways to torture people. But Yu Maqin was now in a strong position. It would be very difficult to torture his soul to the point where it was unstable. Yu Maqin saw her indifferent face, her eyes were terrifyingly calm, her delicate face even had a trace of embarrassed blush, and her hair that had not been cut recently had already reached her shoulders, gently fluttering in the cold wind. Her appearance even made him feel that she was a stranger. Yu Maqin saw her take a few steps back again, and his heart trembled, pain appeared in his eyes. He had never thought that the two of them would come to this point. Yu Maqin's voice became hoarse, and he did not want to scare her. "Let's go back, Wei Wei, I'll treat it as if you came out to play." Wei Wei Bai just pursed her lips, and looked at him with an extremely strange gaze. She even raised her hand a little absent-mindedly, and tucked a few strands of hair behind her ear. Then she said, "I won't." A faint but fierce sentence. It was not very powerful, but it was unusually heart-wrenching. There was only a short distance between them, but it felt like they were separated by the Milky Way. Wei Wei Bai sneered, "Why? Are you going to lock me up again? I'm not yours. You can do whatever you want to me. Who would like a rapist and a prisoner? I'm not a masochist." Her words were cold, and her smile carried traces of malice. Yu Maqin's hand slowly fell. He only looked at her with a pair of sorrowful eyes. Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. Her malice and willfulness were more innocent and vicious than the most ignorant child. "I'm just playing with you. In this day and age, feelings are so worthless. Why are you so stubborn? Don't you know that we should part on good terms?" These words were so vicious that it made people want to beat the host to death. Even the system felt that it was rubbish. However, Yu Maqin's soul began to become unstable. These words were more powerful than Wei Wei Bai running away 100 times. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of ridicule. She crossed her arms and activated her venomous tongue. "Binding my soul to you forever. What right do you have to do that? Did you ask for my permission?" The hatred in her eyes burst forth. Yu Maqin saw the genuine hatred in her eyes. He found it difficult to breathe and his whole body swayed. He took a step forward. It seemed like he wanted to cover her eyes. Being hated and knowing that he was hated were two different things. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Her eyes were terrifyingly cold. "What's the use of locking me up forever? You've worn away the little bit of love I had for you. I don't want to be with you forever. You said that you love me, but you love yourself." Wei Wei Bai was not afraid of him approaching. Instead, she also took a few steps forward. The cold wind blew through her hair. Her eyes were cold and forlorn under her messy hair. Slash. Chapter 1783. Do you really love me? Yu Maqin. Her words were like a heavy blow to the man in front of her. Yu Maqin's lips were trembling, and the redness in his eyes was about to turn into tears of blood. He was stubborn, and his voice was gentle. I love you, Wei Wei Bai. He loved her. He had never doubted this fact. If he didn't love her, why would he force himself into such a state? He had guarded his heart for 100 years, suppressing his evil intentions, and had never done anything that went against the heavens. Nothing had ever been able to shake his heart. But because of her, it collapsed overnight. Wei Wei Bai's lips curled up slowly. Her cute and delicate appearance was seductive to the bone, and her eyes were full of flirtatiousness. Her flirtatiousness was unearthed by him unscrupulously. Once it was exposed, it was actually so beautiful and sharp. But it was a pity that this beauty left no room for negotiation when she was ruthless. No, you don't love me. If you love me, you won't hurt me like this. She pressed on step by step, not giving him any chance to breathe, and every blow was fatal. If you love me, you won't force me, lock me up, and force me to only be with you forever when I don't want it. She had already walked in front of him, her posture arrogant and cold. But with a crazy hatred. Yu Ma Qian, touch your conscience and tell me, do you love me? Yu Ma Qian's pupils constricted violently. His hands trembled, wanting to touch her, wanting to tell her that he was full of love. He was only forced by her. She was the one who forced him into such a crazy situation. He didn't want to hurt her, not at all. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless, and slapped his hand away forcefully. The force was so strong that the back of his hand was red. She said coldly, you don't love me at all. You hate me to death, and that's why you're taking revenge on me. These words denied everything about him. He had abandoned everything, been coerced by evil intentions, and even dared to do all kinds of outrageous things for her. However, she was easily defeated by a few words from her. Yu Ma Qian's heart was filled with malice. Her hatred caused his mind to go into a daze, and his words came out through gritted teeth. Wei Wei, stop talking. His voice was trembling, starting from his throat, as if he was sobbing blood. The instability of his soul was even more intense. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips when she saw how desperate he looked. She couldn't bring herself to say anything vicious. The system said, his soul is shaken. Wei Wei Bai sighed. I know. She actually didn't want to use such a desperate method to force Yu Ma Qian. However, Yu Ma Qian was simply too invincible. She had been forced into a dead end and had no choice but to speak so harshly. Her words chilled his heart. If she hurt him like this, it would be hell mode for her to increase her favorability in the future. He would not believe her, nor would he love her again. The system was silent for a while before saying, just a little bit more, then you wouldn't have to work so hard. It broke the connection between their souls. Only then could it bring her out of here. Its power was gradually weakening because of Yi Yuxuan's gradual awakening. Before its power completely collapsed, it had to see Wei Wei Bai succeed. She had to succeed in surviving in the real world. When Wei Wei Bai heard the system's words, she hesitated for a moment before suddenly turning around. She looked at the iron ladder and said, I'm leaving. If you're a man, then don't bother me. I'm in pain by your side. You can't even give me happiness, so how dare you say you love me? If you really love her, then give her happiness. Instead of letting her live in torment. Chapter 1784. She had to bear the restraints that did not belong to her. Wei Wei Bai looked at the dark sky indifferently after injuring him. There was a faint light in the east. Dawn had arrived. She felt that Yu Ma Qian's soul must be unstable after being injured to such an extent. However, by the time Yu Ma Qian regained his senses, her little tricks would not be enough. He should be locked up or tied up, but he would still continue. Just as Bai Weiwei was about to finish her act, she went down the iron ladder again. However, Yu Ma Qian's gentle voice came from behind her. Weiwei, I will give you happiness. Wei Wei Bai, ? Before she could react, Yu Qian had already appeared behind her. His slender body was pressed against her. Wei Wei Bai froze and quickly turned around. However, she saw Yu Qian looking down at her. He was a little careful as he reached out to touch her face. As if he was afraid that she would reject him, his movements were unbelievably slow. The light in his eyes was incomparably red. A few strands of mist gathered and tears slowly fell from the corners of his eyes. Then he said in a low voice, "In the future, I will not pester you." After saying that, he smiled. This smile was like the light in the sky. Even the red in his eyes slowly faded. His black pupils reappeared in his eyes. Under his messy black hair, his face was unbelievably pale. Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with doubt. However, she heard the system shout, "Your soul is so unstable that you can break the connection." She was distracted and could not stop Yu Qian in time. Yu Qian's fingers came to the back of her neck. It was as if he was sentimental, but he did not dare to get too close. He took hold of her hair, a gentle movement. It was full of love. A peachwood sword appeared in his other hand. It had a red tassel, and was as red as blood flowing through it. "I will not pester you forever. I love you." The peachwood sword pierced through his chest and he pulled it out. The tip of the sword was stained with blood, which splashed onto Wei Wei Bai's face. The connection between their souls was completely severed. It wasn't the system that broke it. It didn't even have time to burn the flames in its hands. Yu Qian used suicide to completely sever his soul. Mahogany had shattered his own soul. He would not be able to bind Wei Wei Bai's soul. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, as if she didn't know what had happened. Her voice trembled as she said, "Yu Qian." Yu Qian was covered in blood. The peachwood sword fell to the ground. He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingertips wiping away the blood on her face. Unable to wipe it clean, he lowered his head and kissed it. His aura reeked of blood. A thick aura of death surged out. His voice was low and weak, like a child who had been wronged. Afraid that she would not believe him, he could only keep emphasizing, I won't pester you in the future. I love you very, very much." When she first appeared in his 100 years of dark and lonely life. At that time, he might have already started to fall in love with her. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to live under the sun forever and be happy. He was filled with malice, and his obsession did not dissipate. To obtain her, he would do anything. This kind of him was no longer worthy of appearing in her life. She was right. He couldn't give her happiness, so how could he pester her? Yu Qian's vision began to turn black. His body slowly slid down, his fingers slipping from her face weakly. The morning light appeared on the horizon. The sun appeared behind by Wei Wei, and the halo warmed her face. And her face was filled with tears. Yu Qian seemed to want to reach out and wipe her tears. But he didn't have the strength to lift it. /collect button to record this reading. Chapter 1785. With his soul broken, even if he died, he wouldn't turn into a ghost. This was for the best. He was afraid that if he died, he would turn into a terrifying ghost because of his strong obsession. She was afraid of ghosts. If he turned into a ghost, he would definitely follow her and not let go. He would hide in her shadow and stick to her back. At night, he would come to pester her. It was like the most loathsome and frightening spirit behind the scenes. Luckily, he couldn't turn into a ghost. Otherwise, she would think that he didn't love her. Because his pestering would make her suffer. Yu Qian fell to the ground. In the next moment, she was kneeling down and hugging him. She kept shouting in his ear, "Yu-Ma-chin, are you crazy? I didn't let you die, you're simply crazy." Yu-Ma-chin listened to her panicked words and felt her body tremble in fear. His expression gradually became peaceful and happy. He tried to open his black eyes and looked at Wei Wei Bai in a daze, wanting to force out a smile. At least she didn't completely hate him. She was still worried about him and would be sad about his death. He tried to reach out his hand, wanting to touch her, but his fingers lost the last bit of strength and finally fell. Without his existence, she would be happier. Yu-Ma-chin's black eyes lost the last bit of light. The notification of the affection also sounded. Ding, the male lead's affection is at 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission. The host can choose to leave this world or continue to stay here. Because the soul binding was broken, she didn't need to stay here forever. Wei Wei Bai heard the notification of the affection, but still stupidly reached out to touch Yu-Ma-chin's wound. Blood poured out and dyed her fingers red. She almost couldn't believe that his heartbeat had disappeared. This was the first plane where the target had died before her. Her heart was empty and her mind was blank. She didn't know what to do. She said she was sad, but she couldn't feel the sadness in this world. She was just at a loss, an empty loss. It was more unbearable than sadness. The system looked at the emotional blocker and issued a sharp warning. It reached out and touched the shield. A flame appeared in its hand, and the power of the flame stabilized the shield again. Wei Wei Bai couldn't feel her own feelings. However, she was still sad. Because she couldn't feel her own sadness, she felt even more sad. This sentence was very long-winded. The system found a more accurate description. The strategy quest was completed. The shackles that bound her soul had all collapsed. Wei Wei Bai was no longer bound by the plane. Now that it could take her away, she didn't feel bad anymore. The system was just about to reach out and cover her eyes to take her away from this plane. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai holding the peachwood sword with one hand and stabbing it into the blood vessel on her wrist. Blood gushed out. She pressed the blood into Yu-Ma-chin's mouth. Wei Wei Bai said, "The blood of a pure young body has the effect of calming the soul." She was expressionless as she fed her blood to Yu-Ma-chin. The system finally couldn't help but say, "But the male lead is already dead." Wei Wei Bai said, "Try it. If you leave like this, I feel guilty." After so many planes, she didn't feel guilty. Yu-Ma-chin, however, made her feel this way. Wei Wei Bai explained, "In the end, he didn't do anything wrong to me. Tying my soul to death was also my punishment for letting him find out about my deception." No matter how much of a jerk she was, she knew that once she was found out, this kind of deceiving of people's feelings was really going to be struck by lightning. Therefore, Yu Tian Tian was driven crazy by her and did something terrible. Actually, she couldn't blame him. Not only did she drive him crazy, she also forced him to commit suicide. She didn't have any feelings anymore, but she still had a little bottom line. She let Yu Tian Tian down. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1786. Wei Wei Bai kept feeding Yu-Ma-chin blood, her face was frighteningly pale. The supermarket was closed, she couldn't exchange for anything to revive him. The biggest failure she had ever made was to close the supermarket this time. In the end, she was a failure and a very weak conqueror. If it wasn't for the system, there was still the supermarket. She was useless. The system couldn't help but advise, "Let's go, Wei Wei, you don't have to stay in this world for the rest of your life. Wei Wei Bai just stared at Yu Ma Qian, lowering her head to feed him blood seriously. Calm the soul, calm the soul. She wanted to bring his broken soul back. But his body gradually turned cold. She didn't feel sad, but she didn't know why. She knew that she was very sad. Maybe Yu Tian was too sweet, she didn't want to be the most gentle target. To end up in such a miserable state. The system looked at Wei Wei Bai's indifferent face as she cried. It was silent for a long time, then sighed. Every time she left first, it didn't let her know how miserable the male lead with a favorability of 100 would be after losing her. This time, the male lead was tortured to the point of dying prematurely. It was a terrible blow to Wei Wei Bai. The system muttered silently, I owe you. I really owe you. Then it stretched out its hand and appeared from the void. Its fingers were flawless, blooming from the flames. Red light spots fell from its fingertips. The light entered Yu Ma Qian's body. His soul was broken, its flames turned into threads, and began to sew the cracks in his soul. The sewing process was unusually smooth. Because of the fate reversal, it began to take effect. Yu Ma Qian was the son of Providence of the plane to begin with, and he also had the reversal of Providence cheat. His soul was broken, as long as he had enough time. He could be revived in another way. And its entry was just to speed up the process. It also allowed his soul to condense in his body. Let him come back to life. It wouldn't drift away and become a lonely ghost. Wei Wei Bai didn't see the system's hand. It was very secretive. Wei Wei Bai didn't pay attention to her surroundings, so she misinterpreted the system's action of mending her soul. The last needle was completed, and the soul began to enter a state of rest. The system silently retracted its hand. It crossed its arms in front of its chest and floated to observe Yu Ma Qian. The blood on Wei Wei Bai's wrist dripped into his mouth. When the sun shone on their corner, Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes suddenly fluttered. She looked up blankly. Yu Ma Qian's temperature seemed to have risen. Was it warmed by the sun? She suddenly reached out and touched his chest. The bleeding had already stopped, and what was even stranger was that the wound had actually healed. All that was left was a pool of dried blood on his clothes. Under her fingers on his chest, the sound of his heartbeat was slow. Her blood could save him. Wei Wei Bai frowned. How could this work? She actually didn't think that her actions could really bring a dead person back to life. She just felt that if she left like this and did nothing, she would be letting Yu Tian down. Wei Wei Bai touched his chest and kept confirming the faint heartbeat. It was really the sound of a heartbeat. And it wasn't her imagination. She didn't know whether it was because she was relieved or because she was too tired. Her whole body fell down beside Yu Ma Qian. The sound of an ambulance came from downstairs. The system said, they just called the hospital to come and get you. The first thing they did when they were injured was to call the ambulance. How could he be like Bai Weiwei, blindly tossing and turning? Look, the two of them have collapsed from the torment. Slash. Chapter 1787. Wei Wei Bai did not know how she was dragged to the hospital. Yu Ma Qian's condition was good, the scariest wound on his body had healed by itself. It was just that he had lost too much blood. It was fine after a blood transfusion. Wei Wei Bai's condition was much worse, all kinds of tests were done. If the wound on her wrist was not taken care of, it was possible that she would become a cripple. It took her 3 to 4 days to recover. Wei Wei Bai regained her energy, only then did she notice that something was wrong with Yu Ma Qian. She was fine. Why was Yu Ma Qian still not awake? He was lying quietly on the white hospital bed. The young man's weak appearance was missing the fierce and gentle eyes. He was unbelievably weak. He was still a young man when he died. After being revived, he had a mature and calm temperament. His appearance was still that of an 18-year-old. He was like a flower, even his skin was thin and white. Wei Wei Bai looked at him expressionlessly for a while, then asked, "So, he's in a vegetative state?" The system said, "There are too many cracks in his soul, he needs to rest for a while before he can wake up." Wei Wei Bai nodded, but did not say anything. She only thought for a while, then said, "Then I'll wait until he wakes up, then I'll leave." She would treat it as an end to a beginning. Who knew that she would wait for 3 years? The time that the strategy could stay had already passed by a few months. But because of the reversal of fortune, the main system was actually hidden this time. It did not come looking for trouble. The system watched as Wei Wei Bai wiped Yu Maqian's fingers. She was wiping his body just now. For 3 years, Yu Maqian's body condition was improving day by day. He was not like other vegetative people who had muscle atrophy. In fact, his body was still growing. The young man's thin appearance was also more mature, that masculine charm was also much stronger than before. Wei Wei Bai wiped Yu Maqian's fingers after he put on his clothes. His fingers were unusually white and clean. His joints were perfect, and his fingers were long and slender. The hands that belonged to a Taoist were flawless. Bai Weiwei calmly wiped his body, then moved him and put him in the wheelchair to push him out. The natural law school was still Yu Maqian's natural law school. This was because Yu Maqian had left behind too many spirit-branded retainers and spirit-branded demons. These terrifying things were all under the control of Yu Maqian. Even if Yu Maqian lost consciousness, they could not escape the fate of being enslaved. Other than Yu Maqian, only Wei Wei Bai recognized these things. They would do whatever Wei Wei Bai told them to do. There were many capable people in the natural law school. It wasn't that no one had seen Yu Maqian fall and wanted to snatch the position of the natural law school. Wei Wei Bai used the power of the spirit-branded retainer to guard the natural law school. Not a single person was able to defeat Yu Maqian's servants. Wei Wei Bai sighed. How was Yu Maqian a top student? He was practically a god. She was a bad student, but she could still kill everyone with the things that he left behind. This was simply unreasonable. Wei Wei Bai actually did not have much feelings for the natural law school. She just felt that the outside world was full of ghosts. The natural law school was a place to catch ghosts. She felt safe staying there. After all, the ghost-catching master Yu Maqian could not be woken up. She had to take him everywhere. What if they stayed in a haunted house? So the natural law school was still better. At least ghosts would not dare to come here. Although Wei Wei Bai had stayed in this world for a long time, she did not feel uncomfortable. Yu Maqian fell asleep. She helped the spirit-branded retainer to take care of him. The rest of her time was spent reading novels, playing games, and playing with figurines. Her days were very comfortable. The system did not persuade her to leave, as if it knew that she had her own reasons for doing so. Chapter 1788. At first, Wei Wei Bai just thought that Yu Maqian was too pitiful, so she wanted to at least give him a good ending before she left. This had nothing to do with feelings, it was just something she stubbornly wanted to do. But she didn't expect that Yu Maqian would sleep for so long. She had no choice but to stay, and found that this kind of life was quite leisurely. So she didn't think that she had to leave. After all, this plane was the most comfortable of all the planes except for when she flipped over. She just treated it as a vacation. When she returned to reality, she wouldn't be able to stay for more than a few days before she ran to the next plane. So she just treated it as her slacking. The system didn't rush her, but just like her, it didn't even turn over and thought about how to get coupons to buy discounted snacks. The sun was very good, Wei Wei Bai pushed Yu Maqin into the courtyard to bask in the sun. She also pulled over a recliner and sat on it to bask in the sun. The condition of Yu Maqin's soul was getting better and better. The scars between the cracks were also gradually disappearing. The system said that if there were no accidents, Yu Maqin should be able to wake up after a while. She yawned and thought, I'll think about leaving then. This kind of life of eating and waiting for death was really beautiful. Wei Wei Bai thought about it, then closed her eyes and fell asleep. When the system saw that the host was asleep, it immediately pulled a headband and tied it to its forehead, then rolled up its sleeves to get coupons. The most recent coupons were for its favorite snack shop. It was a rare 30% discount coupons and a gift coupons. If it could get the gift coupons, it could exchange for a box of snacks gift bags for free. The system laughed and stared at the screen. It was counting down the seconds. At this time, it was a competition of eye speed and hand speed. And full concentration. Neither the system nor the host noticed that Yu Maqin's fingers moved. Then, his thick eyelashes fluttered slightly. In less than a few seconds, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were clear and dark. When he woke up, he saw himself leaning against the wheelchair. The sun shone on his knees and it was warm. Yu Maqin's mind was completely blank. Slowly, the things that happened before his death came back to him one by one. He let her go. He killed himself to fulfill his love for her. Because he knew that he was full of evil intentions, he couldn't control himself from restraining her. He couldn't bear the pain that he had caused her and that she would never be able to live happily ever after. So, he was still alive. Yu Maqin didn't feel any happiness, only a deep pain. Although he didn't know how he survived. But he did not want to face the world of losing her. This was one of the reasons why he left so tragically. Another reason was that he wanted her to remember him. He was afraid that she would forget him. That was why he had chosen to die in her arms in such a terrifying and resolute manner. Yu Maqin stretched out his finger and stared blankly. He could feel that although his soul was still injured, it was slowly recovering. Only then did he regain his senses from the shock. Only then did he realize that he heard the faint sound of the recliner rocking. He turned his head in a daze and saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the recliner under the warm sun. Her long hair cascaded down the chair. Her ink-black hair had a satin luster under the sun. Her quiet and beautiful face matured a little and shed the cute childishness. Her beauty was pure. Yu Maqin stared blankly, as if he couldn't believe that she was still there. Chapter 1789. He slowly reached out and touched her hair with his fingertips. Her soft and cold hair wrapped around his fingers. It was a real feeling. Yu Maqin suddenly felt that she was about to wake up. He let go of her hair and immediately closed his eyes to pretend to be asleep. He didn't even know why he did that. Wei Wei Bai took a short nap and stretched lazily. She looked at Yu Maqin. She found that he was already asleep. She didn't think much of it and pushed Yu Maqin into the house. She said as she walked, "When are you going to wake up? I can't leave in peace." Wei Wei Bai was just casually nagging. Yu Maqin's fingers trembled. He wanted to open his eyes, but now he didn't dare to. She didn't leave. Was it because he was in a vegetative state? So she sympathized with him and couldn't let go of a disabled person like him. Yu Maqin didn't know whether he should be happy or not. She didn't kick him away and turn to leave. Or sad. She only sympathized with him and didn't like him. Wei Wei Bai put the wheelchair by the bed. She reached under his armpits with some effort and moved him to the bed. Her soft body, trembling fingers, and chaotic breath made Yu Maqin feel her existence. Yu greedily snuggled in her arms. He didn't dare to open his eyes. He didn't dare to let her find out that he was awake. He was afraid that she would leave as soon as he woke up. The dark malice in Yu heart had disappeared, but he was afraid that it would grow again. Malice came from obsession. His obsession with her would only increase. One death made his malice disappear, but it didn't mean that he could remain in a harmless state for the rest of his life. At that time, he would start to crazily pester Wei Bai again. And she was right. When she didn't love him, his pestering was no different from a perverted stalker. No one would like a pervert. Even if the pervert was crazy to this extent because of her. How innocent was she? Why did she have to bear his heavy love? As for the fact that she lied to him, she was still young and immature. She was almost an orphan, and she grew up in a place like the Imperial Tao sect. Becoming a little liar was also for the sake of living. If she wasn't lying, she would have had a hard time. She might have starved to death before she met him. Yu favoritism towards Wei Bai had completely skewed his worldview. He even felt that it was better for her to lie to him than to lie to others. At least let him have her for a while. Wei Bai covered Yu with a blanket, then turned to the Shikigami and said, "Bring me today's commission." A spirit-branded retainer could do many things. Before Yu fell into a vegetative state, he had entrusted many of his tasks to his spirit-branded retainers. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to strengthen the Tian Dao sect while guarding her every day. Wei Bai had to stay in the natural law school, so she had to accept some important missions. After all, it was profitable. She handled the missions one by one. Wei Bai handled them at Yu bedside. Yu secretly opened his eyes to look at her. Her long hair was tied up, and the side of her face was facing him. Her beautiful nose and the curve of her jaw were perfect. Wei Bai didn't notice his gaze. After finishing a few missions, her eyelashes fluttered casually, then she looked at the bed. Yu immediately closed his eyes. Wei Bai didn't notice anything. She just glanced at him out of habit. Then she turned back to deal with the missions. Sunlight shone in lazily through the window. Yu opened his eyes again and looked at her in a daze. Let him look at her again. Let her stay by his side for a while longer. If being in a vegetative state could make her stay, then let him lie to her for a few more days. She lied to him. He lied to her once. Maybe they would be even. Chapter 1790. Wei Bai finished the task, leaned back in her chair, and started playing games. With Yu behavior, she couldn't kick him away and play by herself. But ever since she started the strategy, she became a shut-in. So she happily stayed at home to play games, play with figurines, read novels, and comics. She became a shut-in. A Wi-Fi, computer, and cell phone, that was the whole world. In between playing games, Wei Bai would occasionally go online to look at vegetative care. Although Yu was different from other vegetative people, he was also a vegetative person. But thinking about it this way, even if Yu Tian became a vegetative person, it was a very convenient vegetative person. There was no massage, no need to worry about his skin condition. This was a beautiful boy who came with self-recovery, healing, and cleansing. The money she earned all these years didn't seem to be of much use, so most of it was used to buy things to calm the soul. Occasionally, she would also donate some blood to Yu. It made his soul more stable. Yu Tian was really the target she had spent the most effort on in so many planes. In the past, she would immediately die after the side mission was completed when the favorability was full. Being forced to stay in the plane for the rest of her life, she also felt that it was endless overtime without rest. She didn't care much about the target at all. Yu Tian died early. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't feel two strong emotions. She actually felt that for a moment, she was tortured by Yu Tian. And it was a great torture. So for a period of time, her body wasn't good. Her limbs were weak, and her mind was in a trance. She didn't feel any pain. But she really felt a strange discomfort. And when she decided to stay to take care of Yu Tian, she didn't resist. She didn't feel like working overtime like before. Maybe she stayed willingly. Her mentality was more of a vacation, and she seemed to be relaxed. After Wei Bai finished looking at the vegetative care and playing games, she stood up from the chair easily and went to wash her face. When she washed her face, she felt that someone was looking at her. Wei Bai was scared. Ghost? She immediately turned around and saw a little yellow figure secretly hiding under the door and looking at her. Wei Bai, wasn't this Yumachian's spirit-branded retainer? But his yellow talisman spirit-branded retainers were all in a daze. Especially after Yumachian fell asleep, these sluggish spirit-branded retainers looked more like drawings. Apart from carrying out her orders. Usually, he didn't drive it. Did this Shikigami become a spirit? Wei Bai and the yellow talisman man stared at each other for a while, then she suddenly walked forward step by step. The little yellow talisman immediately crawled out of the door and stumbled out. Wei Bai chased after him. But he didn't see the yellow talisman figure. She turned around to look at the spirit-branded retainer in the closet. There were all kinds of spirit-branded retainers inside. They were all yellow talismans, but the talismans were all different. Wei Bai didn't pay much attention to them except for entrusting them with tasks. That was why he wasn't sure if the spirit-branded retainer had run into the cupboard to hide. Would a spirit-branded retainer harm others? Wei doubtfully reached out to touch her chin and pondered. Behind her, Yumachian secretly opened his eyes. He was holding a yellow talisman in his hand. When he saw her leave earlier, he panicked and immediately placed his consciousness on the spirit-branded retainer to follow her. He was afraid that she would leave. Wei Bai couldn't figure out what was going on, so she asked the system. Just now, a spirit-branded retainer turned into a spirit. Are you okay? The system's face was pale and haggard, but it was unusually excited. Transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here. 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 Download the at https://m/com button at the bottom to record this chapter. You'll be able to see it the next time you open your bookshelf. If you like Transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 1791. It snatched a gift voucher and 3 discount vouchers. This was worth more than 10,000 gold coins to the system. That was why it still fought for the vouchers and said without even turning around, it's not a big problem for a spirit-branded retainer to become a spirit. Yumachian spirit-branded retainers are all bound to their spiritual imprints. Even if they become spirits, they won't hurt you. Even if a spirit-branded retainer became a spirit, they wouldn't resist their master. That was because their spiritual imprints all came from their master. When the master created the spirit-branded retainers, it was out of kindness. The spirit-branded retainers wouldn't have any bad intentions. Not to mention, Yumachian had bound all of his spirit-branded retainers' imprints with Wei Bai's scent. If Yumachian was here, the spirit-branded retainers would definitely listen to Yumachian. But if Yumachian wasn't here, then the spirit-branded retainers would view Wei Bai as their master. This was why Wei Bai could command the spirit-branded retainers as she pleased. She even knew that Wei Bai was a loser. Yumochian's spirit-branded retainers were all hiding their powers. Wei Bai didn't need to use any power at all to be able to use them. Wei Bai nodded and accepted the system's explanation. When Yumochian saw her turn around again, he immediately closed his eyes. The yellow talisman in his hand instantly disappeared into the air, leaving no trace behind. Wei Bai didn't see the yellow talisman, so she didn't think too much about it and went to get some water. After all, in a place like the Heavenly Academy, anything could happen. A few days ago, a servant came to tell her that the 1,000-year-old tree in the front yard was always singing at night. She thought that it was haunted, so she secretly took a dozen spirit-branded retainers to take a look. In the end, she discovered that the old tree's flowers had become spirits, and a bunch of flower spirits were singing. After the song was finished, the flowers turned into fruits. Needless to say, those fruits were great for brewing wine. As long as the seeds of the fruits were returned to the old tree, they could take as many fruits as they wanted. Therefore, Wei Bai was numb to whatever strange things she saw. Wei Bai came to the bedside. She put one hand through Yumochian's neck and pressed on his hair. His hair had grown again. She lowered her head and carefully fed him water. Yumochian's fingers, which were hidden under the blanket, kept trembling. He even carefully controlled his breathing. Her soft warmth against his body made his cold and empty heart start to warm up. After she finished feeding him, her fingers and body moved away from him again. He could even clearly hear the sound of her clothes rustling against each other as her footsteps gradually moved away. Yumochian carefully opened his eyes and saw her walking out of the door. Only when he saw that she was not around did he dare to breathe heavily. He pressed his hand against his chest. His heart was racing. Yumochian could not help but reveal a trace of a smile. She was still willing to care about him. This was simply redemption for him. The spirit-branded retainer in the cupboard seemed to have sensed his awakening. Their strength increased greatly, and they were ready to come out of the cupboard. Yumochian moved his fingers and suppressed the spirit-branded retainer's movements. They returned to the cupboard as dolls. A yellow talisman appeared on his finger. The talisman transformed into a miniature spirit-branded retainer. The spirit-branded retainer flew out and quickly flew back. Then, it gave him all the information he wanted. All spirit-branded retainers were capable of storing information. He finished organizing the information. He realized that 3 years had already passed. No wonder her hair was so long. Wei Bai did not leave. She had been taking care of him since he was in a coma in the hospital. Yumochian knew that it was because he had left in such a tragic manner that she felt guilty and stayed by his side to take care of him. He heard footsteps outside the door. Yumochian immediately closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing, pretending that he was still in a vegetative state. Transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here and read the at https://www.sashu.com/transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com transmigration system, my Adonis, come over here and read the full article at https://sashu.com to make it easier for you to read the full article next time. You can click on the button Transmigration System, my Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 1792. Wei Bai did not notice anything strange about him. She came to the bedside and touched his forehead. She only let go when she confirmed that his temperature was normal. Yumochian's breathing became heavier, but it soon became even. She acted like a person in a vegetative state who was in deep sleep. A few days passed unhurriedly. The system finally finished robbing the coupons. Its face was haggard, but it hugged its coupons happily. In this unprecedented coupon war, it had snatched 7 30% discount coupons and 2 gift packs of snacks. The most amazing thing was that it even got half a month's worth of lunchboxes from the canteen. There would be free meals in the future. The system was about to share its good news with the host with a smile. When it turned around, it saw that the host was reading a novel. It was probably another novel about the overbearing CEO falling in love with his little wife. It was normal. What was not normal was that the Yumachian on the bed had his eyes open. The system silently looked at the host who was reading the novel wretchedly. It then looked at the dumbfounded male lead who was looking at the host. No matter how it looked at these two, they were quite compatible. The system softly reminded, the male lead is awake. It did not know how long he had been awake. It had been busy robbing coupons these few days and did not pay much attention to the male lead's condition. After all, it had been a few years and nothing had happened. Of course, it would be lazy. When Wei Wei Bai heard the system's words, her eyes were still staring at the novel. Her expression changed and she asked, "What's the color of his eyes?" The system said, "Black." It was especially black and clear. It was obvious that he was a good person. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she sighed in relief. The red-eyed Yumachian was too extreme, too scary. The one with black eyes was her Tian Tian. Wei Wei Bai said, "Just woke up." The system said, "Woke up?" Maybe, probably. Why was this answer so unreliable? Wei Wei Bai calmly pretended to finish reading the novel, put down the reader, and turned her head absent-mindedly. He wanted to pretend to look into Yumachian's eyes and then naturally know that he had woken up. But when she turned her head, she saw that Yumachian had his eyes closed. His thick eyelashes were incomparably quiet and did not even tremble. His breathing was extremely steady. There was no sign of him waking up. The system said, "You're spinning too slowly." He closed his eyes and fell asleep again. How could anyone fall asleep so easily? Wei Wei Bai roughly knew that Yumachian had woken up a long time ago, but she didn't know why he was still pretending to be in a vegetative state. She did not intend to expose him now. Because you can never wake up a person who is pretending to be asleep. Wei Wei Bai stood by the bed and sized up Yumachian a few times. Suddenly, she reached out and gently touched his face. Inch by inch, his fingertips were warm, tender like water, deep like the sea. Yumachian did not move. He didn't even change the rhythm of his breathing. Wei Wei Bai blinked. He was really good at controlling himself. She held back her laughter and then suppressed it. Her voice slowed down. "Brother you've been asleep for 3 years. I thought I could wait until you woke up, but I met my true love last month." Yumachian's eyelashes trembled. Although the rhythm of his breathing did not change. His muscles were obviously tensing up. Wei Wei Bai pretended not to notice. Her voice had a hint of joy. "I've never met such a handsome boy. We get along so well. I don't need to pretend in front of him, and there's no need to lie." His fingers were gripping the bedboard so tightly that his nails were about to crack. Wei Wei Bai gently combed his messy hair and said softly, "I only knew how much I hurt you when I met him. Feelings are beautiful, but very heavy things. I shouldn't have used my feelings to lie to you." The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m/sashu.com. Save button. Chapter 1793. Yumachian really wanted to say something. But his heart was empty, and he didn't know what to say. Her every word dealt a blow to him, and it was enough to make him want to go back to being a vegetable. If he had to wake up and face her falling in love with someone else, then it would be better if he never woke up. Wei Bai, how can you hold it in? She continued, he's going to study abroad and asked me if I wanted to go. I really wanted to go, but seeing you like this, I felt that I couldn't bear to leave you behind. Couldn't bear to, in her heart, this was all that was left. There wasn't even any hatred or sympathy. Yu Ma Qian felt his lips and teeth were dry, and even breathing became difficult. He heard her sigh faintly. If you wake up, I'll be grateful to you. Grateful. He didn't want her gratitude. Yu Ma Qian almost wanted to open his eyes and hug her to not let her go. But when he thought about how he would wake up, he might not even have the heart to do it. She would be like a cute little bird, happily flying away with the boy she loved. That's right, he was a century-old man. What right did he have to be by her side? Even if his body was only in his 20s, his soul was undoubtedly too old for her. He didn't understand the games she liked. He didn't understand the novels she liked. He didn't even understand the internet slang that she occasionally used. They were never from the same era. Yu Ma Qian almost wanted to open his eyes again. Let her be. He wasn't that generous. So Yu Ma Qian continued to struggle to maintain his rhythm and pretend to be in a vegetative state. Wei Bai looked at Yu Ma Qian's eyelids. His eyelids were trembling, but he still didn't open his eyes. She said, it's time for the date, Uncle Yu. I'll go first. Yu Ma Qian. He actually became an uncle in her eyes. Wei Bai couldn't hold back her smile. She pretended to get up and walked out step by step. What dress should I wear today? I don't know if he will kiss me today. Her voice was as light as a lark. Her footsteps were like that of a young girl in love, light and lively. By the time Yu Ma Qian reacted, she had already run out. She went on a date. Yu Ma Qian opened his eyes in a daze and pulled his hand out of the blanket. His fingernails were covered in blood. Meanwhile, Wei Bai, who had walked out of the door, said to the system, I don't believe that Yu Ma Qian will be able to hold back after being cuckolded. She wanted to see how long he could pretend to be in a vegetative state. The system watched as Yu Ma Qian jumped up from the bed and stumbled over. That miserable look on its face was just short of tears. He felt that the host was really not a plaything. He had slept for 3 years, and now that he had finally woken up, he had to be tortured again. Yu Ma Qian was really lucky not to have been tortured to death. Because Wei Bai had pranked Yu Ma Qian, she left the Tiandao school without taking anything with her. She was hoping that Yu Ma Qian wouldn't be able to hold back and would run out so that she could expose his trick of pretending to be asleep. However, she only took a few steps before she felt something sinister behind her. Wei Bai looked up and saw that the empty path had suddenly become lively. Groups of people, with pale faces and dark eyes were walking back and forth. Wei Bai suddenly remembered that today seemed to be the ghost festival. She immediately looked straight ahead and pretended that she couldn't see anything. Her body stiffened as she was about to turn around and walk back. A pale, ice-cold hand was already on her shoulder. Miss, where are you going? Wei Bai trembled and couldn't answer. She didn't have her spirit-branded retainer with her, so if she answered, she would be taken away, / The is at https://m, Sashu. Com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1794. You can search, Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com, on Baidu to find the S. Could it be that she had bullied Yu Ma Qian too much? Was this her retribution? In the end, dozens of ghostly hands touched her body and kept asking, where are we going? Where are you? Take me away. They were looking for a substitute. She really had the constitution of encountering ghosts whenever she went out. It was safer to be an otaku. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled. She wanted to take out the yellow talisman from her sleeve. It was the talisman that Yu Ma Qian had left behind. But before she could take it out, her wrist was grabbed by a ghostly hand. The ground under her feet began to crack. A group of ghostly hands were about to drag her to hell. A cold voice came from behind her, scram. The malicious spirits behind her screamed tragically. A golden light burned, turning into countless specks of light. The ghostly hands were all eliminated in an extremely efficient manner. Before Wei Wei Bai could react, a body that wasn't hot, but very familiar, was already close to her. His hands firmly reached out and hugged her from behind. A familiar breath brushed past her ear. Wei Wei, don't be afraid. Wei Wei Bai immediately calmed down. She couldn't help but say softly, brother Yu. The man behind her stiffened. He suddenly wanted to pull back his hand and run away. However, Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his wrist. She suddenly turned around and saw Yu Ma Qian looking at her guiltily. His face was pale because of his long sleep. Her appearance was reflected in his beautiful black eyes. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but laugh. Why did you rush over to stop me when you heard that I wanted to date a gigolo? Yu Ma Qian stared at her in a daze. He seemed to be unable to understand her words. Wei Wei Bai let go of him. She saw that he actually ran over without wearing shoes. Yu Ma Qian stood there helplessly. He didn't seem to know what to say. The two of them were speechless for a while. Yu Ma Qian finally understood what she meant. You know me. You're awake. Wei Wei Bai nodded and said casually, congratulations on being alive. Don't commit suicide in the future. Life is so beautiful. It's meaningless to die for a woman. As a man, you have to take responsibility. Don't die so casually in the future. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before saying, then I will leave. Yu Ma Qian's expression was somewhat sluggish, and could even be said to be calm. He suddenly whispered, you haven't fallen for another man. Her tone just now seemed to be flirting with him. So she didn't like other men. Wei Wei Bai burst into laughter. Why? Do you really want me to fall in love with another man? Yu Ma Qian stared at her. After a while, he said with some difficulty, this is what I'm most afraid of, but if you really like a boy, I will let go. He wanted her to be happy. I've always wanted it. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment before asking, really? Yu Ma Qian was silent for a moment before saying, but you have to agree to let me follow you. Wei Wei Bai, she could like other men, but he wanted to follow her. So he wanted a threesome. Yu Ma Qian thought that she didn't agree and immediately said, I won't disturb your life. I just want to protect you. With your physique, it's easy for you to meet those century-old ghosts, so you need a protector. People with pure yang physiques were experts at catching ghosts. But if they didn't know how to catch ghosts, they would easily attract powerful ghosts. This was because this type of physique was like a light bulb. Ghosts could see them, but little ghosts would avoid them. Some very powerful ghosts could pester them instead. Wei Wei Bai rejected him. You don't have to follow me. I'm leaving. Yu Ma Qian suddenly said, are you only willing to stay by my side if I become a vegetable? Being by her side was his last wish. If she wasn't willing to do that, he was already cornered. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Yu Ma Qian, she didn't finish the sentence, don't kill yourself. Yu Ma Qian suddenly swayed. His face paled and he fell into Wei Wei Bai's arms. He fainted. Wei Wei Bai, the system said, you're pretending. Wei Wei Bai immediately shook Yu Ma Qian. Hey, Yu Ma Qian, don't pretend to be asleep. I know you're awake. Yu Ma Qian hugged her and closed his eyes, pretending to be dead. Wei Wei Bai said, Are you a man? How can you be like this? Yu Ma Qian didn't say anything. He would rather be in a vegetative state. Don't leave me. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that she laughed. Why? If you pretend to be in a vegetative state, I won't leave. Do you want to pretend for the rest of your life? Yu Ma Qian, he could. If he was in a vegetative state and she didn't leave, he could pretend for 100 years. The. Chapter 1795. Wei Wei Bai was furious. Yu Ma Qian's shamelessness was beyond her expectations. When she dragged Yu Ma Qian back, this man actually pretended to be asleep the whole way. After throwing him at the door, Wei Wei Bai walked in. Yu Ma Qian quietly adjusted his sleeping position and just lay there without getting up. He was the best scammer of the year. Wei Wei Bai played with her phone for a while. Where's Yu Ma Qian? The system nibbled on the golden chocolate in the gift box and said, he's still lying there. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She was very stubborn and wanted him to lie there. In the past, she was the one who shamelessly scammed others. Yu Ma Qian had grown so much, he actually dared to rely on her. She smiled coldly. If he wants to lie there, then so be it. After playing a round of the game, it started to rain outside. Wei Wei Bai asked, He's still lying there? The system said, He's not moving at all, he's just lying there. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. As a man, he had no ambition at all. Wei Wei Bai went to wipe her figurines, feed the fishes, and water the flowers. A long time passed, and soon the sky was dark. The system said, He's still lying there. Bai Wei Wei was already eating dinner, and the corners of her mouth twitched. No one can see him lying there. The system said, I made a small barrier, no one can see him. Wei Wei Bai said, Does he think I'll drag him in? The system said, You won't. Wei Wei Bai said, Am I such a heartless person? After she finished speaking, she slammed her chopsticks on the floor and walked out. The system frowned. It was chewing on the chocolate. There was nothing wrong with the blocker. However, the host seemed to be softening towards Yu Ma Qian. She could leave immediately, but she didn't. The system wondered if the host was. Why did chocolate taste so good? The golden chocolate was so delicious. The system immediately forgot what the host was doing. It immediately went to rummage through the gift bag. Except for the golden supreme chocolate. There was also the heaven on earth donut. Wei Wei Bai came to the door with an umbrella and saw Yu Ma Qian lying on the ground. The big tree at the entrance was blooming with flowers. The flowers fell on him, making his pale and delicate face look even more beautiful and dreamy. Wei Wei Bai dipped in the water for a while and watched the petals and rain fall on him. Looking at his calm face, there was no sign of reluctance. Wasn't it cold? Wei Wei Bai stood there for a while. Thinking that she still had to team up with someone else to play the game, she resigned herself to her fate and carried him on her back. Yu Ma Qian's body wasn't considered heavy compared to other men in his age group. But it was still enough to suppress Bai Wei Wei. The sound of her labored breathing made the man on her back open his eyes. His eyelashes were covered with tiny droplets of water, making his clear black eyes look even clearer. Because she had to carry him, the umbrella was thrown aside. So Wei Wei Bai started to get drenched by the rain. Their bodies were very close together, and the cold temperature spread to each other. Wei Wei Bai's steps were a little unsteady. Step by step, she walked into the house. Yu Ma Qian made it clear that he wanted to be a deadbeat. People like him really wanted to be in a vegetative state. They could pretend to be dead and not move. Wei Wei Bai's foot knocked against a rock. She cried out in pain, but she didn't let go of Yu Ma Qian. Suddenly, the person behind her pushed her away gently. Then, without waiting for her to turn around, a pair of strong arms lifted her up horizontally. In the rain, Yu Ma Qian lowered his head. His face was tense, and his lips were tightly pursed. /////. Chapter 1796. It didn't dare to say that she died every time. Those targets all had a relationship of 100 for their entire life. And each of them lived a more tragic life than the other. Other men might have a relationship with them, but it was difficult for Yu Tian. Because he loved her for too many lifetimes. He had fallen in love with her again and again. His yearning and love had seeped deep into his bones. His feelings couldn't cool down. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while. Then I'll wait until his relationship with me drops to 80 or 90 before I leave. At that time, Yu Tian wouldn't be so heartbroken to the point of wanting to commit suicide. To be honest, Yu Tian's death was really traumatic. The system hesitated. Are you sure? Wei Wei Bai, at most, in a few years, his relationship will definitely drop. At that time, his feelings will fade, and he won't try to kill himself anymore. I'll leave then. System, the blocker is holding, but the host is still thinking for the male lead. Is the blocker broken, or is the host's values too good? Yu Ma Qian saw that Wei Wei Bai was staring at him blankly. He thought that his words had scared her. He immediately shut his mouth. His stubbornness had already scared her, and he had even done inhumane things to her. So Yu Ma Qian said carefully, Wei Wei, I was just joking. Don't take it seriously. At most, he would secretly follow her in the future. It would be better if she didn't know. Wei Wei Bai looked at him from the corner of her eyes. Oh, since you said so, I'll leave tomorrow. Yu Ma Qian's fingers trembled. He opened his mouth a few times, and finally said reluctantly, wait for the rain to stop. How many days would it rain? It would be sunny tomorrow. Bai Weiwei casually responded with a good. Yu Ma Qian immediately showed a happy smile. It was as if staying with her for one more minute was one more minute of happiness for him. There was no end to the rain. It rained every day. Wei Wei Bai looked at the weather forecast. It said that it would be sunny every day. Why does it keep raining outside? She looked at Yu Ma Qian, who was drawing talismans beside her. It's still raining. It's been almost a month. Yu Ma Qian's fingers trembled, and the talisman was ruined. He nonchalantly crushed the talisman and threw it away. Maybe it's going to rain. Wei Wei Bai looked out of the window strangely. He didn't see a few shikigami jumping into the rain with a few yellow talismans. The rainstorm talisman was the talisman that Yu Ma Qian had drawn the most recently. While drawing the rain spell, he said to Wei Wei Bai hypocritically, the sky will clear up soon. Don't worry. In the end, the rain did not stop. When Wei Wei Bai saw that her clothes were starting to mold, she finally couldn't bear it anymore. She hurriedly walked out of the bathroom after showering and saw that Yu Ma Qian was saying something to his spirit-branded retainer. She immediately grabbed the spirit-branded retainer and said fiercely, Is this your doing? It's going to rain for 2 months. Aren't you afraid that it will drown you? Yu Ma Qian immediately realized that Wei Wei Bai knew about his little trick. He looked away guiltily. I'm only limited to the rain near my home. It won't affect others. Wei Wei Bai slammed the spirit-branded retainer on the table. You're affecting me. Even if my clothes are dry, there's a damp smell. Don't you feel uncomfortable? Yu Ma Qian immediately blurted out, Not at all. I don't feel uncomfortable as long as you're here. She didn't know what to say to that. Yu Ma-qian saw that she was indifferent. She seemed to dislike him acting on his own accord. His dark eyes became misty. He lowered his eyes, not daring to look at her. He did everything just to make her stay for a few more days. For Wei Wei Bai, this was a despicable and shameless method. Yu Ma-qian held a rain talisman in his hand and crushed it little by little. Slash. Chapter 1797. He was so blessed to see her by his side every day. He didn't even dare to hold her hand. He didn't dare to touch her face. He didn't dare to kiss her. He only dared to sneak a peek at her at night when she was asleep. That was good. He told himself that it was fine as long as she was within his sight. However, even this bit of extravagant hope was a burden to her. Yu Ma-qian smiled bitterly. Before his smile disappeared, a kiss was printed on his lips. Her lips were as soft as clouds and as sweet as honey. He was stunned. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai's face close to his. Her warm breath blew on his face. His pale face immediately turned red. Wei Wei Bai kissed him lightly. Then, her lips left his. I won't leave for the time being. I'll leave when you don't like me anymore. Yu Ma-qian's mind buzzed. His lips trembled. Finally, he said, then you have to stay by my side for the rest of your life. He didn't like Wei Wei Bai, he would like her even after he died. What was this if not for the rest of his life? Wei Wei Bai felt that all men were like this when they were in love. They dared to say all kinds of nonsense. She didn't care about promises. Okay, if you can love me for the rest of my life, I'll stay for the rest of my life. Then, she really stayed for the rest of her life. This life was neither long nor short. His favorability for her had never dropped, and his eyes had never turned red. With her by his side, all his obsessions were satisfied. He only felt that no matter how dark the world was, it was beautiful. Malice never had the chance to stay in his body. Wei Wei Bai had a short life. She didn't feel the pain before she died because Yu Ma-qian used a talisman to suppress her pain. She was nearing the end of her life. Before she died, she asked, why don't your feelings fade? Yu Ma-qian had a head of white hair. He smiled and said, I don't know what it means to be a little lighter. I only know that today, I thought I loved you the most. But tomorrow, I realized that I love you even more. Wei Wei Bai's lips twitched and she sighed. If I had known, I wouldn't have promised you a lifetime. Yu Ma-qian reached out to hold her hand and said in a low voice, why don't you make a bet with me? If I still like you so much in my next life, you can also keep me for a lifetime. Wei Wei Bai wanted to sneer. She wouldn't be so silly next time. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to smile coldly. She just slowly closed her eyes. He had finally left this plane. Yu Ma-qian watched as her soul suddenly disappeared. He did not become an evil spirit, nor did he return to the cycle of reincarnation. He had once recalled that he had occasionally heard her half-truth half-lie. After she died, she would go to a place where no one could find her. A place that even he couldn't find. So they don't have a next life. Yu Ma-qian's smile gradually disappeared. In fact, there was no next life. He had already discovered that his soul and body had been tempered for 100 years. He had long become immortal. But he was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would see through him, so he had always pretended to be old. She was no longer here, so his immortality had become torture. Yu Ma-qian took out a red talisman. After refining it for most of his life, he finally had a use for it. He placed the talisman on his body. His body began to collapse, and his soul shattered into specks of light. In the golden specks of light that filled the sky, Yu Qian returned to his youthful appearance. He quietly hugged Wei Wei Bai and buried his head in her neck. Tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. He said in a choked voice, "Thank you for accompanying me for a lifetime. Wei Wei, I am very happy." Being able to love her was the happiest thing in his life. Chapter 1798. The system carried Wei Wei Bai's soul and quickly moved forward through the passage of reality. Staying in the plane world for too long was not a small burden to it, because it needed to maintain the shield. But fortunately, its coupon gave it a strong power. Eating snacks while repairing the shield was a very exciting thing to do. The system hugged a round light. In the middle of the light lay a sleeping little Wei Wei Bai. Its speed slowed down, because the red line on Wei Wei Bai's wrist wrapped around its feet. It untied the thick red line. This red line was ridiculously long and ridiculously strong. It was practically invulnerable. Even if Yi Yuxuan made a red line, it was not inferior. It wasn't a second-rate item either. Even after expending a lot of effort, it could only wear down a little. The system touched the white light and made sure that Wei Wei Bai was sleeping deeply enough, then it continued to move forward. But in the next second, it suddenly stopped. A strong force pulled on the red line. The red light in its hand was almost pulled away. "It's here again." The system turned around fiercely. Every time it was in front of reality, Yi Yuxuan, that bastard's power consciousness, would come to snatch Wei Wei Bai's soul. God's favored child was amazing. His strength was awesome, wasn't it? That damn red line, it was the best chain. The system held on tightly to Wei Wei Bai's soul, not daring to let it be thrown away again. The red flame in its hand turned into a blade, and fiercely chopped at the tight red line. In the end, the red line's strong power caused its blade to shatter into sparks, flying everywhere. When it resisted, the red line tightened, and the system and Wei Wei Bai were dragged forward. It saw the black road in the middle, divided into two. A golden light band cut the road. On the other side of the golden light band, mountains of bones and rivers of blood surged. A hurricane blew, and cold snow fell. That world was the end of the intersection of blood and snow. On the towering mountain of bones, on a white skeleton throne, a man sat sideways with one hand supporting his cheek. His long black hair fluttered in the wind. His eyes were half closed as if he was half asleep. A golden light was hidden in the center of his half-closed eyes, like a bottomless abyss. On his other wrist, there was a red thread wrapped around it. His fingers were also grabbing onto the red thread. He was using a terrifying power to pull it and its host into that world. This was the place where Wei Wei Bai had accidentally entered last time. In the depths of Yi Yuxuan's soul, that incomparably powerful energy gathered. The system gritted its teeth as it was slowly pulled over. It seemed that Yi Yuxuan's unconscious strength was terrifyingly obsessed with Wei Wei Bai. The red string was his best weapon to capture Wei Wei Bai's soul. It looked left and right. It had to cut the red line. Otherwise, they would never be able to return to reality. The system looked at its hand with a cold expression. No, it still had to protect Wei Wei Bai and continue to cross planes. He couldn't use all his strength. So, the system turned around and looked coldly at the chaotic spacetime in the darkness. Every spacetime was intertwined and separated. As long as there was a little power to disturb them, a huge storm would be created. A spacetime storm was a terrifying power. If it disturbed the rock dragon turbulence, it might be dragged into it with its host. But if it was pulled over by Yi Yuxuan, it would also die. It might as well take a gamble. After all, it had a lot of experience dealing with spacetime turbulence. The fireworks in the system's hand turned into a small red light spot and flew out silently. T. Chapter 1799. It gently hit one of the spacetime mirrors. In the darkness, the red light spot was like a nuclear explosion. It emitted a dazzling light and suddenly exploded. The spacetime mirror was disturbed and moved, rolling up a huge spacetime turbulence. The power of the turbulence came crashing down. The system reached out and grabbed the red line, throwing it into the air. A huge spacetime turbulence was like thousands of blades, cutting towards the red line. More than half of the red line was broken in the rain of blades. The man sitting on the throne was originally drowsy, and the strength of pulling the red thread was just an instinctive action. He didn't use much strength. But when more than half of the red line was cut, he suddenly opened his eyes. White snowflakes pressed on his eyelashes and fell on his face. His expression became fierce and irritable. It was as if something important to him was going to be taken away. He pulled his wrist hard, and a strong force dragged the red line over. The system was originally avoiding the blades of the turbulence. In the end, it was dragged over. It hugged Wei Wei Bai's soul light ball and was about to fly into Yi Yuxuan's soul consciousness world. The red line snapped. It was all broken. The system immediately rolled through countless turbulence attacks and ran desperately to the door of reality. It plunged into the door and finally returned to reality. The man on the throne looked at the red line in his hand strangely. Strange, what was he going to pull? His mind was blank, and his heart was empty. He felt like he had lost something very important. What was it? He slowly closed his eyes again. His golden eyes were as deep as the abyss, calm and indifferent, without joy or sorrow. Snowflakes and hurricanes filled his world with white. Red blood continued to flow at the foot of his mountain. In reality, Yi Yuxuan suddenly opened his eyes. His heart was in severe pain, and his limbs seemed to have been hit by a heavy blow. Because of the excessive pain, he twitched. He got up from the sofa, bent his body in pain, and reached out to look. Sure enough, the red line was broken. He dreamed that something had cut the red line. It completely broke his marriage with Wei Wei Bai. It turned out to be true. Was it so painful to sever the red string? When Yi Yuxuan thought of Wei Wei Bai, he staggered up from the sofa. Just now, he had gone to deal with some trivial matters. In the end, he suddenly felt sleepy. Once he fell asleep, it was a long dream. The first half of the dream was very sweet. The latter half was filled with despair. He would never be able to win the love of a woman in his lifetime. Even the sweetness at the beginning was a lie. Even if he already knew that she didn't love him. But this was the first time he knew this fact in his dream. What an ironic fact. The pain of digging out one's heart and lungs, penetrating into one's bones and marrow, even if it was through a dream. He felt pain. Yi Yuxuan breathed heavily and quickly opened the door, only to see a white ball of light gently falling into her sleeping body. And what was hugging the ball of light was a pair of flawless white hands, a pair of children's hands. Yi Yuxuan didn't think much of it. He quickly rushed over, grabbed the hands tightly, and pulled them out. The system was already exhausted. It was anxious to return Wei Wei Bai's soul, afraid that a second later would cause problems. So when it saw that there was no one in the room, it didn't look around and put the soul into her body. Just as it put it down and was about to pull out its hand, Yi Yuxuan's hand grabbed its arm fiercely and dragged it out of the room. Chapter 1800. Drag, drag. Out. Go. Out. Ah. Yi Yuxuan was stunned. The person he was dragging was a child. Floating in the air, a head of short red hair fluttering in the wind, a pair of red eyes that were as lively as fireworks, staring at him. It was him. Only 7 or 8 years old. She was naked, and her skin was as white and tender as a peeled egg. Her face was round and cute, but her expression was particularly dull. System, this scene was a little awkward. This was a little unexpected. Yi Yuxuan finally said coldly, "You're a man." System was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry too, haha." Was it that surprising that he was a man? Couldn't systems be men these days? Or did the male lead hope that he was neither a man nor a woman? No, the male lead should hope that he was a sexless person. It would be best if he wasn't even human. He wasn't actually human, but what could he do if he looked like this from the beginning? He was also in despair. Yi Yuxuan was very calm. Other than being a little surprised at the beginning, his emotions quickly stabilized. "Who are you? What's your purpose? Where did you take her?" System, could he not answer? In the end, System said, "I'm saving her, and if you're doing it for her good, don't tie a bunch of weird things to her, especially the red string, it'll kill her." It was a rare meeting. Hurry up and say it clearly. Next time, there would be a matter of stealing Wei Wei Bai's soul. He might not be able to handle it. The red string on Yi Yuxuan's wrist was still there, but it was broken. He looked at System calmly, and was about to continue asking. Bai Weiwei's breathing became heavier. She reached out and covered her forehead with her hand in confusion. Her head hurt like hell. She didn't feel this way before. Was it the side effect of sleeping for too long? Yi Yuxuan was distracted, and System quickly broke free from him, plunging into a light spot on top of Wei Wei Bai's head. The specks of light immediately dissipated. He hid in the trash can to put on his clothes, but his clothes were all blown away by the space-time turbulence. This was the first time he had been dragged out, and he was still naked. Otherwise, Yi Yuxuan wouldn't have been able to tell that he was a man at first glance. He silently closed the trash can and refused to go out. This world was too scary. Yi Yuxuan did not care about the system anymore. He immediately reached out and gently massaged her temples with his fingers. Her headache subsided. When she opened her eyes, she saw Yi Yuxuan's indifferent face and the worry in his calm eyes. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but blink. Her voice was hoarse from sleeping for too long. "Yi Yuxuan." Yi Yuxuan made a muffled sound and asked, "Are you feeling better?" Wei Wei Bai nodded. Only then did Yi Yuxuan release her temple. Then, he got up and poured her a cup of warm water. He held her in his arms and fed her. Wei Wei Bai wanted to reach out to take the water, but he was not willing. After drinking the water, Wei Wei Bai pushed him away with great effort, separating the two of them from their overly intimate position. She stood up and said, "Where is this?" This room was very similar to her room at home. All kinds of furnishings and decorations were fine. Even the paint on the walls was very light. This overly feminine and dreamy feeling. It did not seem like the style that Yi Yuxuan liked. His style was very cold, and the colors were all cold. Yi Yuxuan replied softly, "My apartment, an apartment near the company." Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to ask how many apartments he had. The head of the Yi family didn't have much. He had a lot of money. Is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1801. Wei Wei Bai stretched her limbs. She had slept for too long, so her body felt much better. However, her body still felt numb. Yi Yuxuan was simply carrying out what he said last time. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw him. Wasn't he tired of taking care of a comatose person for so long? Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything. He only looked at her with a deep and strange gaze. His stare made everyone feel uncomfortable. Wei Wei Bai's brain was still muddled. A lifetime was too long. After so many times, she still couldn't get used to such a long time. That darned Ma Qian. His affection for her didn't drop at all. He maintained a good impression of her until she died. She felt that it was weird. Wei Wei Bai supported her head with her hands. She frowned and thought that perhaps Ma Qian was a little strange. Other men couldn't possibly be as loyal as him. She couldn't help but glance at Yi Yuxuan. This man's handsome face was still the same, and his expression was still cold and expressionless. After not seeing him for so long, she actually felt that he had become more handsome. Did his personality change again? She carefully probed, "Where's my father?" The only person she cared about was Bai Changyan. As for Bai Yaoyao, who was she? It had been too long. Ever since Bai Yaoyao fell and was seriously injured and taken away by the bodyguards. She didn't have the time to find trouble with her. She would wait until she was done with her strategy before settling the score with that B*****. After going through so much, she felt that B** was no longer important. Yi Yuxuan didn't answer. Instead, he remained silent for a long time before saying gently, "Aren't you going to ask me?" She had lived a lifetime. A very long time. Even in his dreams, he could feel the ravages of time. Every time she woke up, her gaze was lost and tired. However, when she woke up, her first reaction wasn't to ask him how he was doing. Instead, she asked her father. A faint jealousy appeared in his heart. It hurt a little. Perhaps it was this dream that reminded him of her cold and heartless gaze. That was why he started to feel bad. Moreover, his red string was broken. It was not easy to tie the string of marriage, but he had forcefully snatched away forever. Nothing else. No matter how determined Yi Yuxuan was, she couldn't help but feel bleak. This feeling was different from the intense pain he felt after she left in his dream. Instead, it was a more gentle but slow discomfort. Wei Wei Bai saw the melancholy in his eyes and frowned. Without thinking much, she reached out and touched the slight wrinkle between his eyebrows. What happened? Did the company close down? She was surprised to see such a melancholy expression on Yi Yuxuan's face. Could it be that something had happened? Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything. The warmth of her fingertips stayed on his forehead. He stared at her in silence before reaching out to hold her finger that was touching his forehead. He brought it to his lips and gently kissed it. The company isn't important. I just want to be the first person you ask when you wake up. That was all. Yi Yuxuan's personality was really fickle, but her sappy nature remained the same. She said helplessly, "Okay, how have you been recently?" After all, she still needed her life points. She couldn't just ignore him just because he gave it to her. Yi Yuxuan's eyes curved, and the calmness in his eyes turned into broken stars. "I'm doing well." Wei Wei Bai refused to listen to him. "I'm doing well because you've always been here." She immediately followed up, "I'm doing well. Everyone is doing well." Yi Yuxuan originally wanted to say the truth because you've always been here, but he forcefully swallowed it down. However, some of the melancholy in his eyes dissipated. Wei Wei Bai got off the bed, "I'm going to the bathroom." Wei Wei Bai felt like she had been lying down for a lifetime. She urgently needed a hot bath to prolong her life. When she left, Yi Yuxuan finally showed some signs of struggle on his face. Then he finally reached out and touched his wrist. He couldn't touch the red string. But when he said softly, "I won't tie you up anymore." If it would endanger her life, he didn't want to and didn't dare to tie her up. The red string seemed to know his wishes. It turned into red dust and dissipated in the air little by little. The red string on Wei Wei Bai's wrist also began to disappear. Wei Wei Bai, who was taking a bath, felt a little itchy on her wrist. She couldn't help but scratch it. Sure enough, she still had to take a bath. If she didn't take a bath, even her hands would itch. / save button. The next time you open the bookshelf, you'll be able to see it. If you like, comma. Chapter 1802. After Wei Wei Bai finished showering and putting on her clothes, she carefully called the system. Tongzi, has anything happened recently? The system finally dared to appear and whispered, nothing, your dad and Qin Qiu are playing tennis and talking about life. Your company is flourishing under the care of the Yi family. Just sleep, I promise you nothing will happen. Nothing, why do you sound like a thief? Wei Wei Bai said, Yi Yuxuan is weird. The system said, he's always weird, he's never normal. Since when was the male lead not weird? If he wasn't weird, wouldn't he become normal? A normal person would have no characteristics, he couldn't be the male lead. Perfect logic. Although Wei Wei Bai felt that the system made a lot of sense, she still felt that Yi Yuxuan was weird this time. It was that kind of disheartened feeling. This was also the first time she saw this kind of decadence in Yi Yuxuan. He had always been like a robot, his emotions were very well adjusted. His eyes were very sharp. His mouth was better than anyone. What was more terrifying was that his brain was like a computer, but it was better at reasoning than a computer. So no matter how much pain this kind of man was in, he would not feel decadent. Because he knew decadence was useless, he would abandon this kind of emotion. Successful people were successful like this. Wei Wei Bai could not describe his condition. She asked, how's the health bar? The system said, no change. Wei Wei Bai, the system said, there really is no change. When we came back from the previous plane, we went through a turbulence and accidentally damaged some things, so when you come back this time, you can't collect health bar. So her health bar could only be maintained at 5,500. Right, because she spent a few hundred health bar in the previous plane, after deducting it, she only had 5,200 left. But because she could get 5,500 health bar. Just now, it had secretly helped her get 300 health bar. It was better than nothing. Wei Wei Bai said, wait, this works. She stayed in the plane for a lifetime, but her health bar did not change. The system replied, that was an accident. It won't happen again in the next realm. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was about to become dispirited. He had worked for an entire plane for nothing. He was practically a slave laborer in Africa. The only thing he could get for working so hard was that he wouldn't starve to death. None of them could make a fortune. Guarding Yi Yuxuan and not being able to make a fortune, the main system was even worse than her. The system glanced at her clean wrist. Life points could not be expanded in this plane because the red string was broken. The tight connection between Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai suddenly broke apart. The intimacy between the two of them was damaged. He would be able to recover in the next plane. Hence, this time, Wei Wei Bai was unable to gain any HP. The system asked, are you leaving? It was also afraid of Yi Yuxuan. It was best not to stay in the real world for too long. Who knew what other tricks Yi Yuxuan would come up with? She would tie another red string. Next time, he and Wei Wei Bai would have to visit Yi Yuxuan's lair as guests. Once a guest, they would never return. He was terrified of Yi Yuxuan's current state. Not to mention that powerful body of strength that extended out of his soul. That was a master who could slash people with a knife without hesitation. Wei Wei Bai walked towards the bathroom door. No, let's go see my dad first. Ever since Yi Yuxuan appeared, he has become an old man who has retired. Bai Changyan was a strong man in his 40s. Other than his crow's feet, he looked like an old handsome man on the outside. At this age, he was obviously full of energy. In the end, he was raised by Yi Yuxuan into an old man who had retired. T. Chapter 1803. She didn't do her job every day and wasn't encouraged to date Chen. She just ran to play with Qin Qiu. Qin Qiu was also a director, right? Even the most expensive private hospital in the country didn't have as many patients as the public hospital. But he should be very busy. As a result, since he became her attending physician, he and her father both became retired fishermen. What did they do all day long? Fishing, gardening, playing golf, playing chess, eating KFC. They were all salted fish in advance. Nibbling on Yi Yuxuan, right? Well, she wasn't qualified to say. She also nibbled on Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan was really miserable. When she opened the door, her movements were relatively small. When she walked out silently, she saw Yi Yuxuan sitting on a chair, diagonally facing her. His beautiful eyes were half closed, the corners of his eyes slightly bent. His beautiful and calm eyes had a kind of gray coldness. His slender fingers were on the armrest, tapping casually, as if he was thinking about some difficult problem. With a bit of confusion, a bit of decadence. This man rarely sat so straight, as if he was crushed by something. There was a kind of fragile feeling that made one's heart ache. Even his eyes seemed to be dyed with fog. There was no usual sharpness, clarity, or coldness. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused, standing at the bathroom door and frowning at him. She found that he didn't notice her gaze. Normally, this man who was like a radar wouldn't be like this. What's going on? She couldn't help but ask the system. The system didn't say anything. These few planes, as long as Yi Yuxuan was there. The system didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai knew that something must have gone wrong. She didn't know. But for the time being, she couldn't force the system. She couldn't force Yi Yuxuan. The days of being sandwiched in the middle and waiting to be eaten were really difficult. Wei Wei Bai slowly walked over step by step. Yi Yuxuan immediately raised her half-closed eyes. The confusion in her eyes disappeared, replaced by her usual calm and clear expression. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai in her pajamas. She was barefooted, and her fair face was flushed. She looked exceptionally beautiful. His eyes darkened, and his fingers that were tapping on the armrest also stopped. Wei Wei Bai walked behind the two-seater sofa where he was sitting. She put her hands on the back of the sofa and looked at him with a smile. What's wrong? Are you in a bad mood? Xian Xian. Xian Xian was a very cute name. She made it sound even cuter. Her lips and teeth were entwined with each other, and her voice rose at the end. Everyone who heard it felt that this name was really festive. It was even more intimate. As expected, Yi Yuxuan's frown dissipated a little. I'm fine. Let's do a simple physical examination, and then I'll take you out for dinner. Her meals were specially prepared. Physical examinations were also carried out every day. If he woke up, he would have to do a checkup. Her body was getting better. It had always been getting better. In terms of medicine, this was a miracle. The doctor even said that in her case, her body could be repaired by sleeping. In fact, everyone knew that it was impossible for a person to sleep away a terminal illness. But it was Wei Wei Bai who was such a weirdo. This was also the reason why Bai Changyan had never been worried about her sleeping. After all, the originally fragile heart could be improved by sleeping. It could even be healed. That parents were unhappy and even hoped that Wei Wei Bai would sleep more. They would talk about it after she recovered. Wei Wei Bai finally understood that a man like Yi Yuxuan would hold the sky up even if it collapsed. He would still reply casually, "It's fine, nothing happened." Is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1804. Wei Wei Bai stared at him, scrutinizing him intently. But Yi Yuxuan was very natural and calm. Only his eyes softened, and he didn't show any more emotions. Well, compared with Yi Yuxuan, a 1,000-year-old robot, she was a bit worse, at least in terms of hiding emotions. She wasn't as good as him. Wei Wei Bai couldn't see anything, so she could only get up and say, "Okay, then I'll go see my dad." Yi Yuxuan didn't object. He had always indulged her. "Okay, I'll go with you." As long as she didn't get lost and stayed by his side, he was easy to talk to. Wei Wei Bai had no idea of getting rid of Yi Yuxuan, because she couldn't get rid of him at all. After Wei Wei Bai checked her body and ate a special nutritious meal under Yi Yuxuan's supervision, he drove her to see Bai Changyan. Bai Changyan was playing tennis with Qin Qiu in the club. Recently, the company was very stable. The Bai family's business was very good. Plus, with Yi Yuxuan's words, no big company dared to squeeze the Bai family. As a result, Bai Changyan was basically waiting for the pie to fall from the sky. He didn't have to do anything, and the company grew by itself. He also wanted to do more things. But when Yi Yuxuan helped, his means were really not as good as this young man's. As long as the owner of the company was determined to be the Bai family, Bai Changyan was also happy to eat Yi Yuxuan's dividends. They were all family. His daughter had forced herself on him, so there must be an explanation. When they were playing tennis, the bosses of several companies came to say hello. They were all companies bigger than the Bai family. Before, it was Bai Changyan who went to say hello. Now the situation was reversed. Bai Changyan also knew that it was because of Yi Yuxuan. He smiled and exchanged greetings, sent them away, and saw Qin Qiu on the phone. It was the hospital. Qin Qiu had temporarily let the vice president hold the title of acting president, and almost relieved himself of his responsibilities. Qin Qiu's main task now was to keep an eye on Wei Wei Bai's health. This was also the reason why Qin Qiu had always been with Yi Yuxuan. Of course, after soaking for a long time, they would get bored and go out to play with the even more bored Bai Changyan. As for playing with Yi Yuxuan, he didn't dare to think about it. If only Yi Yuxuan could come out to play like the two of them and drink the nourishing wolfberry tea. It was as if the sky was about to collapse. After Qin Qiu finished talking to the acting president, he ordered some important things in the hospital before hanging up the phone. Then, he and Bai Changyan sat on a chair to rest while the waiter served them drinks. Bai Changyan was Qin Qiu. Qin Qiu was a meddler chrysanthemum. The two semi-retired old men were chatting. "The weather is so good. It would be great if Wei Wei could recover. I remember that when her heart disease was not so serious when she was young, she also liked tennis." Of course, he wouldn't allow Wei Wei Bai to do anything that was too intense. That was why Wei Wei Bai's tennis skills were terrible. Later on, when her body was not good, she couldn't do any sports. Qin Qiu drank the wolfberry chrysanthemum water. Wei Wei's physical condition is getting better day by day. I estimate that with her current heart condition, as long as there is no accident, she can be guaranteed to not have a heart attack for more than 10 years. Her heart was not completely healed, but it was already healthy. It was simply a miracle. Yi Yuxuan was originally a weirdo. With Wei Wei Bai, the two weirdos could be considered a match made in heaven. Bai Changyan was drinking tea when he suddenly saw a familiar figure appear in his peripheral vision. The distance was a bit far, so he couldn't see clearly and could only squint. That girl looked a bit like his family's Weiwei. /to-txt. Download. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.